The entire Immortal Divine Temple didn't boast many palaces. Instead, the surrounding area was covered with flat white stone slabs. They're here remarkably fast. 3 divine spirits looked out together. In the distance, a massive oval-shaped universe continuously flickered, each time shifting the distance of an entire universe. Jian Wushuang vibrated the candle dragon wings incessantly, relying on spatial shifting, about to reach the entrance of the universe C. But then they halted. Wu Li's expression turned puzzled as he asked, "Why did we stop?" "Someone's there." Before Jian Wushuang could speak, Dan Bao voiced the reason. This time, Jian Wushuang also sensed it. Actually, those with sharper eyes could see it. Within his own universe, he wore the life tribulation armor and had executed the super-eternal ancient transformation. Now, his divine power had reached a terrifying 6 million. His eyes almost pierced through everything. Naturally, he could see a circular temple floating above the sea. A spherical object seemingly split into 2 pieces. That was the temple he saw. Dan Bao, can you tell how many strong individuals are above? Many. Dan Bao's response was concise. But Jian Wushuang wasn't calm anymore. Many? Then it's troublesome. How did these guys find us? Jian Wushuang wondered inwardly. Now with no way out, the path blocked. The only way to enter the Universe C was through this route. Now that it's blocked, they could only face it. He refused to believe that these people came to kill him. If we can't avoid it, let's go and see. The atmosphere on that main hall doesn't seem hostile. They probably won't harm us, Dan Bao added. But I can sense that the origin within that temple is related to life. The treasure of life? Jian Wushuang frowned. His tribulation armor was also related to life. He just felt a faint resonance earlier, but didn't pay much attention. Now, Dan Bao mentioning the life origin source within that temple confirmed his earlier perception. Indeed, it was a special treasure of life. The Wanlu universe was truly extraordinary. With such treasures, there would likely be a rush from the entire North spacetime to seize them if they were brought to the outside world. No wonder people from the outside were eager to get in. The treasures here couldn't be underestimated by ordinary standards. Jian Wushuang felt a pang of envy as he looked around. Although his tribulation armor resonated somewhat with the temple, it was like trash compared to it. There was simply no comparison. Nevertheless, for safety's sake, he still took the tribulation armor and returned to his usual state, allowing the origin source universe to slowly dissipate. Relying solely on the candle dragon wings, he quickly approached the temple. The fact that the other party could wait for them so calmly meant they were absolutely confident. There was no chance in directly confronting them. It was better to face them honestly. If they were really intent on harming them, there would be time to strike later. If, by chance, the other party hadn't intended any harm towards them but were provoked into action, it would only lead to trouble. Being cautious was enough. If they really had to act, they could instantly rise to their peak. Swish! The figures of the 3 arrived at the edge of the temple and came to a slow stop. They were 3, and so were the ones across from them. Boom! Just as they steadied their forms, thunder rolled across the sky, lightning connecting into lines, surrounding the area and making the space tremble. Then a group of people appeared faintly amidst the lightning. It was Chaoga and the others. Jian Wushuang's eyelids twitched. He glanced over, then paid them no further attention. He could easily tell that these people were in league with those on the temple. Seniors, may I ask why you intercepted us? What's the matter? Jian Wushuang asked directly, without beating around the bush. He could see that the other party didn't harbor any intent to kill. Here's the translation. They probably just wanted to figure out their identities. They might as well come clean. Given the current situation, even if he had many cards up his sleeve, there was no chance of turning the tables. Moreover, Dan Bao's shield of life had not yet recovered. They couldn't afford a direct confrontation. Where are you from? Jian Wushuang asked. And where do you want to go? The 3 divine spirits sitting above the temple throne asked with imposing airs. We come from above, heading to the Universe C. Jian Wushuang pointed upwards, making his intentions clear. These were the strong ones of the great sky dome world. He couldn't tell them he came from the outside world. If he did, they probably wouldn't believe him. It's better to say they came from above. Why are you here? The divine spirit sitting on the left squinted at Jian Wushuang. We came unintentionally. They didn't intend to come here. They just wanted to go to the higher heavens. Or rather, they followed the great monk. Only the other party knew where the stairway to godhood was. Unintentionally, the three divine spirits were momentarily stunned, but they could tell Jian Wushuang was not lying. At their level, trying to deceive them was futile. They could spot the flaws before the words even left one's mouth. As Chaoga slowly descended towards the temple, he said, Your Excellencies, some people related to this person on behalf of Emperor Zhenwu have been restrained. They were prepared on both sides. The things Jian Wushuang did in the Zhenwu dynasty had long been under the surveillance of the Immortal Divine Temple. If they wanted to investigate Jian Wushuang's background, they naturally made full preparations. I've said it, we just came unintentionally. It's useless for you to catch them. Jian Wushuang was a bit anxious. It wasn't as simple as catching Zhen Wuyang and Emperor Zhenwu for the Immortal Divine Temple, but rather, he sensed their intentions. By helping Emperor Zhenwu recover, he exposed the power of life. Originally, he thought that the power of life was not rare in the Wanlu universe. But now it seems different from what he thought. The power of life was precious everywhere. Although it was easy to obtain the power of life in the Great Sky Dome world, the consumption was also considerable. No one knew how many Eighth Tribulation experts were sleeping in the Immortal Divine Temple, and all of them needed the power of life to sustain them. The power of life not only maintained the vitality of the scattered tribulation realm, but was also a necessity for special life forms to enhance divine power. Speaking of which, the uses of the power of life were even more numerous than in the outside world. Jian Wushuang feared this the most. If they set their sights on their power of life, it would mean a fight to the death. Wu Li couldn't help but speak up. Just say what you want to say directly. Don't beat around the bush. He wasn't afraid. Because the great monk was even more desolate than these people and must be approaching them. With help, there was nothing to fear. Arrogant. Chaoga looked at Wu Li daring to speak disrespectfully to the immortal divine spirits and was about to take action. Do not be rude. Just as Chaoga was about to act, he stopped and stood obediently to the side. The three divine spirits each pondered for a moment and had already made plans in private. Restrain them. Since they knew they came from above, they had to ask about things from above. Now that the three guests have arrived, please stay. The withered old man sitting in the middle slowly raised his hand and pointed a finger, instantly freezing the space. Jian Wushuang widened his eyes, unable to believe it. Just now, there was no divine power fluctuation in that move, yet it could freeze the space. Definitely stronger than the great monk and divine wood king. He couldn't even resist. It's over. This time he really messed up big time. Encountering such a powerful individual, he didn't even have hope of escaping. It would have been better to try to escape, at least he could have maneuvered a bit. But now there was no way to escape. Luckily, the other party didn't have any killing intent, just wanted to keep them. Don't resist. Jian Wushuang shook his head at Wu Li and Dan Bao. At the same time, he was thinking of a strategy. How to get away. With the opponent's strength, even if the great monk and divine wood king found them, it wouldn't matter. They wouldn't be able to rescue them at all. Unless Qi Jiuxiao descended, only then could they fight. But the key was that Qi Jiuxiao and them were not on the same side. They could only think of another strategy. You don't need to worry. The withered old man waved his hand and directly sent Jian Wushuang and the others into the Immortal Divine Temple. We just want to know some things about the higher heavens. If you cooperate well, I guarantee you'll be fine. Jian Wushuang sighed. Senior, whatever you want to know, just ask. I'll answer truthfully. But we really have urgent matters to attend to. This time he almost begged. If they were really detained, who knew when they could leave? Although he had time, it wasn't meant to be wasted like this. Let me introduce myself. My name is Jiang Wuyan, one of the founders of the Immortal Divine Temple. I can also assure you that as long as you cooperate, everything will be fine. Jian Wushuang was anxious. They were anxious too. The matter of the source of life was crucial to their life and death. Jian Wushuang took a deep breath, his expression becoming more serious, and then asked, "Senior Jiang, what do you want to ask? Just say it." "Good." Jiang Wuyan, with his skinny claws, scratched his beard and said all the prepared words, mainly asking about the higher heavens, whether there had been any changes. Instead of asking how Jian Wushuang came here, because they could see that Jian Wushuang and his group had secrets, and they wouldn't really say them. It's better to ask about their own interests. The higher heavens. Jian Wushuang pretended to be relaxed but was more panicked than anyone. How would he know what the higher heavens looked like? But seeing the other's appearance, he probably didn't know much about the higher heavens either. So he simply started fabricating a vast and ancient world of the higher heavens. And then led to that incident. The incident. Of course, it was the corrosion of the metal life form on the divine tree of Wanlu. This wasn't much of a secret. Even if he said it, it wouldn't matter. These powerhouses within the Wanlu universe couldn't possibly have any dealings with metallic life forms. The three divine spirits were greatly alarmed upon hearing about the invasion of metallic life forms. They promptly sealed off the space-time, retreating into the depths of the temple. Could these metallic life forms have any connection to the pyramid we saw? Impossible, Jiang Wuyao retorted. That pyramid is merely a treasure. How could it be a life form? But the lad said it's metallic life, not conventional life. It seems more like a special life form. It's highly probable that it's related to the pyramid. I've long suspected a disruption in the source, possibly linked to that pyramid. The dwindling life source within the Immortal Divine Temple had been a matter of speculation, but lacking evidence, they had dismissed it. During its prime, the Immortal Divine Temple could freely traverse the universe sea. They had once plundered treasures within it, using the temple to overcome any obstacle. Their last expedition had been to collide with a pyramid, believing it to be a treasure beyond their grasp. Yet, despite their efforts, they couldn't even scratch it. They eventually gave up and returned to the higher heavens. Shortly after, the life source within the temple dried up. They had initially attributed it to other factors, but now, according to Jian Wushuang's words, it seemed there had been some unexpected event during that time. They had inadvertently triggered some kind of prohibition, and the pyramid had vanished since then. At the time, they had thought it was seized by others. Now, it seemed that within the pyramid might lie metallic life forms, awakened by their collision with the Immortal Divine Temple. If Realm King were to find out they had released these metallic life forms, he would surely be furious. Actually, when the Wanlu Divine Tree was brought by Weiss, the pyramid was already in the Universe Sea, just sealed. It was only because the Immortal Divine Temple had broken the seal that the metallic life forms were released. The three exchanged astonished glances. They had thought some calamity had befallen the higher heavens, only to realize it was due to their own actions. For a moment it was hard to accept. Whoosh! The three returned to Jian Wushuang, this time with a more amiable demeanor. "Young friends, how much do you know about these metallic life forms?" Jian Wushuang said calmly. "In fact, not much. We don't even know their exact location. Just planning to venture into the Universe Sea and try our luck." Realm King had previously mentioned that the metallic life forms were nibbling at the life source of the Wanlu Willow. So, they were probably within the source itself, the interior of the Universe Sea. The stairway to godhood was also there. To achieve godhood, one couldn't ignore the metallic life forms. Actually, it would be easier to deal with them once Danbao became the god of life. Unfortunately, dealing with the metal life forms was not going to be easy. These metallic beings weren't ignorant. They hailed from other spacetimes, possibly knowing more than the three great spirits themselves. The three divine spirits exchanged glances. The truth now laid bare before them. Without deluding themselves, they could even venture into the Universe Sea to seek out these metal life forms. In that case, we cannot shirk our responsibility. Although we don't know how these metal life forms came into existence, they pose a threat to the great Sky Dome world. It's not just the powerful beings of the higher heavens who must act. We will also intervene personally. Jiang Wuyan's words were impassioned. He was eager to confront the metal lifeforms head-on immediately. Jian Wushuang hadn't anticipated the magnitude of the situation. He thought they might not believe or would require more delicate negotiation. But to his surprise, they didn't hesitate to offer their assistance. Not only did they agree outright, but they also volunteered to actively eradicate the metal lifeforms. A glimmer of hope emerged amidst the uncertainty. Senior's noble intentions. Jian Wushuang breathed a sigh of relief, feeling a surge of excitement deep within. Benefactor, this temple is extraordinary. Dan Bao suddenly communicated through mental transmission. He sensed a fluctuation emanating from within the temple. Upon entering the temple, a surge of life force slowly began to emanate, seemingly connected to his own life essence. Upon hearing Dan Bao's transmission, Jian Wushuang remained composed outwardly, but secretly communicated, "What's the matter? There's a source of life within this hall, but it's been sealed by some kind of prohibition." Jian Wushuang's eyes flickered. A life source like that was truly a treasure. It was comparable to the innate life force, and even akin to the origin source of life. He tried to restrain himself as much as possible. Such treasures were not something they could easily meddle with, at least not at the moment. Restrain yourself. Now is not the time for this discussion. We can talk about it when the great monk and divine wood king arrive. Only then will we have the qualification to discuss this. Dan Bao nodded silently, refraining from saying more. This treasure indeed held great significance for him. Jian Wushuang could sense its resonance even through his tribulation armor, let alone Dan Bao, the reigning god of life. If it truly held great value for Dan Bao, then they would have to wait until the great monk and the others arrived before they could confidently explore it. They might be wiped out before they even had a chance to speak if they acted recklessly now. Since the three great divine spirits had pledged to help them search for the metallic lifeform, they were all in the same boat for now. It was imperative to handle the situation carefully. The search for metallic lifeforms couldn't wait. The three divine spirits first instructed Zhao Ge to inform the universe masters of the 8th tribulation realm within the universe sea to gather information, and then politely invited Jian Wushuang and the others into the inner hall. They claimed it was for rest, but it was essentially a form of house arrest. Although Jian Wushuang was anxious, he had no better alternative. Sending Dan Bao to the universe sea was actually the easiest way to find metallic lifeforms, considering its source of life. Having the universe masters of the Immortal divine temple search would be too slow. As the days passed by, the great monk, accompanied by divine wood king and others, roamed the higher heavens for 3 days before entering the universe sea. Meanwhile, Jian Wushuang had been stuck in the Immortal divine temple for 3 cycles. People were on the verge of going mad. One day, in a secluded hall of the Immortal divine temple, Jian Wushuang was casually chatting and drinking with Wu Li, but their seclusion didn't contribute much to their cultivation. They either studied life within their own universe or wandered around the temple. Today, Wu Li emerged from seclusion, and they engaged in idle conversation. Suddenly, hurried footsteps echoed outside the hall. Wu Li immediately put down his wine glass and turned to look outside. "Excuse us, sirs." A faint smile crossed the newcomer's face as he hurriedly entered. Over the years, Jian Wushuang and Wu Li had gained some understanding of the strong figures within the Immortal Divine Temple, aside from the 3 divine spirits. Besides the 3 divine spirits, there were also 10 divine kings. Chaoge was just one of them. These 10 kings had all once led the Immortal Divine Temple. Even the weakest among them was a peak figure of the 8th tribulation realm. The person before them was the former ruler of the Immortal Divine Temple. Chaoge wasn't weak by any means. Southern Saint King, Jian Wushuang and Wu Li both stood up simultaneously. He was a universe master of the 8th tribulation realm. He had stepped down due to Chaoge's appearance and had later ventured into the universe sea, aiming for further advancement. Unfortunately, every step in the 8th tribulation realm was extremely difficult. Among the universe masters, he was considered one of the top figures in the 8th tribulation realm. However, when it came to divine power, the starting point was millions. It was definitely the peak combat power of the 8 tribulations realm. This was the might of the universe master. Facing such a formidable opponent, Jian Wushuang and Wu Li naturally didn't dare to be negligent. The Southern Saint King gestured with his hand, indicating, "No need to be formal. Sit down and speak." Jian Wushuang and Wu Li followed suit, sitting down, while also anticipating what was to come. Perhaps there would be good news again. During their second epoch in the Immortal Divine Temple, they almost located the position of the metal lifeforms. They had already captured its aura, but by the time they arrived, the pyramid had vanished. Later, even the three great divine spirits personally went in search, but they never found it again. However, it also gave them hope. Now, all the 8 tribulations realm powerhouses sleeping in the Immortal Divine Temple had been summoned. They were all thrown into the universe sea. In fact, the 3 great divine spirits were even more anxious than they were, because there were too many things at stake regarding the power of life. Over the years, Jian Wushuang had also learned that the 3 great divine spirits were not of the 3 tribulations. They were special existences. That was also the reason why the other party was so powerful. In terms of surface strength, they were even stronger than Qi Jiuxiao. Perhaps the 3 of them combined could contend evenly with Qi Jiuxiao. It should be noted that even the Great Monk and Divine Wood King together would fall before Qi Jiuxiao. Special life forms. Their growth potential was much higher than cultivators. Could be seen at the same level. This time we've come to find you because of manpower issues. Originally, you didn't need to go, but recently a new secret realm has appeared in the Universe Sea. As you know, there are still many Universe Masters in the Immortal Divine Temple. They don't lack the power of life, but what they lack is opportunity. So, Jian Wushuang nodded solemnly. Understood. Although he said this on the surface, his heart was already ecstatic. He had long wanted to enter the Universe Sea. Even if he had to follow those people from the Immortal Divine Temple, he would still go in. Staying in the Immortal Divine Temple all the time was not a long-term plan at all. In the blink of an eye, 3 epochs had passed. There was still no news from the Great Monk and Divine Wood King. Not only was Jian Wushuang anxious, but Wu Li was even more so. If they continued to be trapped here, how much longer would they have to wait? Southern Saint King, whatever you need us 3 to do, just say it. Although Jian Wushuang was excited in his heart, he still had to restrain himself on the surface. Otherwise, the other party would definitely think he had ulterior motives. Actually, now in the Immortal Divine Temple, they were of great use to Jian Wushuang and the others, and they might not necessarily want to escape. Danbao had a special method to find the metal life, and by then, they could rely on the power of the Immortal Divine Temple to eradicate the metal life form. With their current situation, even if they escaped, they couldn't deal with the metal life form when they met the Great Monk and the others. First, they were a bit careless. They thought that even if the Wanyao universe was powerful and its population had reached its peak, it wouldn't have more strong individuals than the ancient moon spacetime. But now it seemed that they had overestimated themselves. In just a single Sky Dome world, 8th Tribulation Realm powerhouses could survive until now, and just from what Jian Wushuang had seen, there were at least 5 Universe Masters of the 8th Tribulation Realm. And there were still many 8th Tribulation Realm special life forms that were equally powerful. Not to mention the scattered tribulations, just considering the number of these powerhouses, it could rival the ancient moon spacetime. This was not counting the higher heavens. Otherwise, there would be even more. Originally, they thought that with the Great Monk and Divine Wood King, they could handle everything. But with the threat of metal life form now, they also had to face Babidi. Passive. They had been passive in many things along the way. Ultimately, it was because Jian Wushuang's strength was not enough. Or rather, the things he encountered exceeded the capacity he should have borne. However, without these events and opportunities, he wouldn't have become so powerful. Everything was fair. Jian Wushuang harbored no complaints. Under the guidance of the Southern Saint King, they once again paid homage to the 3 great divine spirits. This time, they would follow the Southern Saint King to venture deep into the Universe Sea to search for the metallic lifeform. In the past, the 3 great divine spirits wouldn't have done such a thing. But after learning the reason for the drying up of the source of life, they became anxious. At first, there was no feeling, but the longer they waited, the more restless their hearts became. Because of worry, they worried that in the future, treasures like the source of life would cease to appear. By then, they would be doomed. The immortal divine temple relied on the word immortal. Without the power of life, immortality became a joke. Even their own survival became uncertain. That's why they were anxious. Although the universe masters of the Eighth Tribulation Realm were not in a hurry, they also lamented the tragedies of others like rabbits and foxes. They knew that sooner or later, they too would meet the same fate. No one dared to say they would reach the Ninth Tribulation Realm. For some reason, the Ninth Tribulation Realm seemed like a shackle, firmly controlling the universe masters. It was always impossible to surpass. In the northern spacetime, there were 9 core temporal rivers. Only 3 ancient, super-strong existences remained. But these 3 were referred to as puppets by Weiss. This just shows. These 3 ancient existences were probably not strong because of reaching the Ninth Tribulation Realm, but because they became eternal existences for some reason. True strong beings capable of revealing Ninth Tribulation Realm power had never appeared. Perhaps such existences existed in other spacetimes or the starry sky. But not in the northern spacetime, at least. This might have something to do with the law rules. The goal of the 3 great divine spirits was not actually the Ninth Tribulation Realm. It was to break through all laws with sheer strength, to transcend the confines of time and space, to forge eternity. The prerequisite for achieving this was the power of life, and the operation of the immortal divine temple. Relying solely on cultivation was basically futile. Jian Wushuang and his companions didn't understand this, so naturally, they didn't realize that these 3 divine spirits simply wanted to preserve their lives. After a few words with the 3 great divine spirits, they continued to exchange superficial pleasantries as usual, without revealing any substantial information. They were mainly concerned that Jian Wushuang might take advantage of the opportunity to escape. They said some nice words, but for Jian Wushuang, these words were meaningless. They went in one ear and out the other. Finally, he expressed his loyalty and then left with the Southern Saint King. After leaving the immortal divine temple, they arrived at the entrance to the Universe Sea. The reason they didn't teleport was actually because they couldn't afford to waste any more life force, and blocking the entrance to the Universe Sea was also quite good. Several teams took turns to explore the Universe Sea in search of metallic lifeforms. Along the way, they could also find some treasures. For example, this time they discovered a new mystery realm. It was a significant find. The realm drifted from the depths of the Universe Sea, just in time for Chowga and his team to discover it, naturally leading them to venture inside. And right now, they were a bit short on manpower. That's why Jian Wushuang and his 2 companions came out to lend a hand. Of course, it wasn't just because of that. Recalling the words of the 3 major divine spirits, especially the look in their eyes regarding the Danbao, it was evident that there was suspicion. Because they couldn't see through Danbao, they felt Danbao was very special. So they asked Jian Wushuang to take people to investigate. Perhaps they could find that metallic life form. This time, as long as they discovered it, they would transmit the location to the 3 major divine spirits, and the immortal divine temple would instantly descend. Anywhere in the Universe Sea, as long as there was enough life force, the immortal divine temple could instantly arrive. With this guarantee, Jian Wushuang and the others felt relieved. They just needed to be responsible for finding it, and once found, they would notify the 3 major divine spirits to come, without needing to intervene themselves. Even Jian Wushuang had thought ahead that when the 3 major divine spirits were busy dealing with the metallic life form, they could take the opportunity to escape. That was the best plan. Unfortunately, every plan was good in theory, but it was difficult to execute when faced with reality. Crash! Southern Saint King stood at the entrance of the Universe Sea, forming seals with his hands, and casted an unknown secret technique. The entrance to the Universe Sea was sealed off. What's this? Jian Wushuang was somewhat surprised, looking at the seemingly ordinary entrance, which, after the sealing, rippled with waves. Soon after, he felt a surge of divine power erupting from it. Southern Saint King said calmly, "What? Haven't you felt the power of the Universe Sea before?" "I'm just curious, Your Highness. I didn't expect the seal of the entrance to be your key. If we had foolishly entered before, we might have been stopped. Jian Wushuang naturally wouldn't mention anything about the Universe C, lest he expose himself. Just now, he was really taken aback. The violent power kept blowing out from the entrance. Is the entire Universe C like this? Jian Wushuang was secretly amazed, his eyes flickering with astonishment. Wu Li, behind him, widened his eyes, afraid that others wouldn't notice they had never been to the Universe C. Jian Wushuang couldn't help but cough lightly, reminding the other party, don't embarrass themselves, making them look like they knew nothing. Fortunately, Danbao remained calm enough, and Southern Saint King, although he had been talking with Jian Wushuang, kept his gaze on Danbao. After the entrance to the Universe C was opened, it didn't take long for several 8th Tribulation Realm powerhouses to appear inside the entrance. These 8th Tribulation Realm powerhouses were all scattered tribulations. Every 100 million years, they rotated once. The other 8th Tribulation Universe Masters followed Chowga to the newly appeared Mystery Realm, while these scattered tribulation powerhouses of the 8th Tribulation Realm, whose vitality was already pitifully scarce, were okay with searching for metallic lifeforms but not fighting. The Universe C was formed by divine power. Flying above consumed a large amount of divine power, which was no less than battling. These scattered tribulation experts had to come back for recuperation once every 100 million years, or else their vitality consumption would be too great, and they might directly fall into a deep sleep. 100 million years outside was equivalent to one era inside the universe, which was why rotation was necessary. In order to find metallic lifeforms, the 3 major divine spirits of the Immortal Divine Temple summoned a large group of 7th Tribulation Universe Masters to search the Universe C. However, the thought power of these people was much weaker compared to the 8th Tribulation Universe Masters. A starving camel is bigger than a horse. Although the scattered tribulations no longer had their origin source, their thought power still remained. An 8th Tribulation Universe Master could handle a group of 7th Tribulation ones. But Jian Wushuang was different. His thought power was no worse than that of an 8th Tribulation Universe Master. That was why the 3 major divine spirits specifically instructed him to go. And there was Danbao. Ever since he became a candidate for the God of Life and refined that treasure, his thought power had become terrifying. The power he couldn't feel, Danbao could. Southern Saint King, it's up to you guys now. The returning 8th Tribulation powerhouses greeted and glanced at Jian Wushuang and the others before entering the Immortal Divine Temple. Southern Saint King smiled faintly. Jian Wushuang, let's go. Sure. Jian Wushuang nodded. This time, apart from them 4, there were 5 other 8th Tribulation experts accompanying them. 9 people in total. They would have to split up when they arrived. However, the 3 of them would be separated. This was to prevent Jian Wushuang and the others from escaping together. Although the Universe C was vast, it was condensed by divine power. It was impossible to detect fluctuations in divine power at all. Only some special marks could allow them to sense each other's positions. Swish! Several figures instantly entered the entrance. They felt a strong wind blow over their faces, and they had already entered the Universe C. Buzz! The sea looked no different from the outer oceans, all pale blue. But the aura was different. The Universe C. It was an ocean of divine power. For practitioners like them, it had tremendous suppressing power. Even flying above it made them feel tired. No wonder those 8th Tribulation experts had to come back to rest and recover. Moreover, the threshold for entering the Universe C was 1,000,000 units of divine power. This threshold was extremely high. It was basically the threshold of the 7th Tribulation Realm. Without being at the 7th Tribulation Realm, coming here was simply courting death. It was fine to wander around nearby, but once they delved deeper, they would perish if they didn't encounter danger. Jian Wushuang looked at the boundless Universe C, deeply shaken in his heart, and said with emotion, "If only we could devour such a vast ocean of divine power." Haha. Everyone thinks the same way. With such a vast Universe C, even if we could control just 1/10,000th, we would be invincible. Southern Saint King chuckled. He had this idea back then. It was his first time entering the Universe C, and he was accompanied by elders from the clan. At that time, he was the Universe Master at the Sixth Tribulation Realm. He wanted to observe this Universe C, but just at the periphery he felt infinite pressure. Let alone devouring it, it was a luxury to be able to stay in the Universe C for a long time. Currently, only 8th Tribulation Universe Masters could survive normally in the Universe C. Or it could be some special life forms at the 8th Tribulation Realm. The rest couldn't stay long. Alright, let's set off. Not far from here, there's a teleportation array. We'll use it to go to the inner region first, and then search separately. Southern Saint King instructed, and everyone flew towards the teleportation array. The teleportation arrays here were built by the 3 great divine beings back then, just to save travel time. It was considered a shortcut for those at the 7th Tribulation Realm. With these teleportation arrays, 7th Tribulation Universe Masters could also venture into the depths of the Universe C. Zhenwu Emperor, a scattered tribulation, had the strength of a half-step 8th Tribulation Realm because he wandered in the Universe C and obtained a giant tortoise shell, creating the Zhenwu secret art. Achieving a half-step 8th Tribulation Realm. It could be said that as long as one ventured deep into the Universe C and had good luck, they could obtain equal opportunities. That was why it attracted so many practitioners to come in droves. The Zhenwu Emperor had risked his life back then, depleting his vitality and almost causing the Zhenwu dynasty to be destroyed, all for the sake of fighting for a treasure deep in the Universe C. If successful, he might advance another half-step. After all, being scattered tribulation, although his strength was at the half-step 8th Tribulation Realm, his room for improvement was limited. Even so, he still had to fight for it. The Universe C was indeed a magical place, captivating people. To see the essence through the Universe C. In fact, the Wanlu Divine Tree was the same. In the outside world, practitioners were obsessed with the Wanlu Divine Tree. Internally, they were obsessed with the depths of the Universe C, because both had powerful treasures flowing out. Riding the teleportation array, they soon arrived at the deep sea of the Universe C. Each teleportation span was quite large. If they flew slowly, it would probably take several epochs. This time span was something even 7th Tribulation Universe Masters couldn't bear. However, peak 8th Tribulation experts could handle it, because their speed was fast enough. Jian Wushuang roughly calculated that even in his state of infinite divine power, it would probably take him an epoch. If he had really come here back then, just flying alone would have been deadly enough. He wondered how the great monk and divine wood king were doing now. If they truly entered the higher heavens, relying on Elder Blue's causal induction, they should be able to discover them in the vast expanse of the great sky dome world. However, pinpointing their exact location could be troublesome. The temporal dynamics of the great sky dome world differ from those of the higher heavens. Yet, the space-time within the Universe C remains stable. As long as they all entered the Universe C, the flow of time remained consistent. What Jian Wushuang didn't know was that both the Great Monk and Divine Wood King had long entered the Universe C, and they had been drifting within it for countless epochs. The Universe C, a vast expanse where heaven and earth meet. No matter which entrance one takes, it leads to the other side. Jian Wushuang and the others could travel through teleportation arrays. But Divine Wood King and the Great Monk had no such luxury. They had to rely on flight alone. Fortunately, with Donbao's help, they had restored their peak strength, and they had also obtained numerous life fruits. Otherwise, they would have exhausted themselves. Jian Wushuang had worried about this, but he had underestimated the abilities of the Great Monk and Divine Wood King. At this moment, deep within the Universe C, floated a withered vine's secret realm. Externally, it appeared as a desiccated tendril, but internally it housed a paradise. Divine Wood King, the Great Monk, and the others were on this vine. When they first entered the Universe C, they only felt that something was peculiar, and they were curious about how the Universe C had formed. However, the Great Monk intentionally concealed the truth, because he knew best the horrors of the Universe C. If they relied solely on flight to find Jian Wushuang and the others, they would likely exhaust themselves, even the Great Monk himself. If word got out, perhaps no one would dare to enter. Fortunately, deep within the Universe C, they encountered a drifting vine. It was a hidden paradise. They took the opportunity to enter this realm. By continuously drifting along this vine, they conserved their divine power. Otherwise, they might have exhausted themselves before encountering the metallic life forms. Coincidentally, the realm they found themselves in was stumbled upon by the likes of Chowga, who were searching for metallic life forms. They were currently trying to break open the realm to search for treasures. Indeed, there were treasures within the paradise, but the great monk and divine wood king had already plundered everything clean. They left nothing behind. So, Jian Wushuang's worries were unnecessary. Not only did they not exhaust themselves, but they also made a considerable profit. Their mouths were filled with delicacies. Their divine power surged. Within the withered vine's secret realm, devastation abounded. There were numerous colossal withered trees, devoid of any vitality. Of course, this wasn't the work of Divine Wood King and the others. It had always been this way. However, beneath these withered trees they harvested numerous fruit cores. These were the cores left behind after the fruits evaporated, which provided significant assistance to their divine power. As the withered trees withered away, they offered immense help to cultivators. One could say every part of them was a treasure. In front of each withered tree, a cultivator sat cross-legged, continuously absorbing the divine power from the withered trees. On the largest withered tree, 2 figures sat in meditation. They were none other than Divine Wood King and the Great Monk. Only these two had the qualification to monopolize absolute resources. The rest could only have a share. Despite being the ones who benefited the most, their expressions now looked somewhat grim. What should we do about those natives from the outside? We should just slaughter them. Absolutely not. The great monk shook his head hastily. Those natives were drawing their attention, and they didn't have the time to deal with them. Besides, this was their first encounter with cultivators. After enduring for so long, they finally laid eyes on living beings. They had to go out and have a conversation no matter what. But once they went out, how should they identify themselves? They couldn't possibly say they came from the higher heavens. The great monk was a powerful native of the Wanlu universe. He knew how difficult it was to enter the Great Sky Dome Great World from the higher heavens. The reason they were able to arrive here smoothly was due to the collapse of the higher heavens. It had turned into a world of ice and snow, devoid of vitality. The barrier of the universe sea had also decreased significantly. What do you suggest, then? Divine Wood King's mood felt somewhat contrived. They had been too suppressed these years, always searching for the Danbao according to Elder Blue's karmic ties. Yet they had received no news whatsoever. And no matter which way they went, they felt an infinite distance away from the Danbao. Now their spirits were almost breaking apart. How could they not be anxious? We still need to deliberate. Since we've encountered cultivators here, we're closer to the Great Sky Dome world. The reason we feel the distance to the young master is remote is because time and space are isolated. Once we enter the Sky Dome world, we can quickly find the young master. Do I still need you to teach me? Divine Wood King snapped. They understood the reasoning, but the key was how to enter the Great Sky Dome world. They couldn't possibly let those outsiders lead the way. Saying such a thing would make even a 3-year-old mock them. Faced with unfamiliar powerhouses, who would lead the way? They could only fight. Fight until the opponent bowed. Then they would be led to the Great Sky Dome world. That was Divine Wood King's idea. But the great monk didn't think so, because outside, there were 6 universe masters. Each of them was at the 8th tribulation realm. Going out, they might not necessarily win. Although Divine Wood King had once refined that supreme treasure, his divine power surpassed even the universe masters. It was at most a one-on-one suppression. Including himself, they could at most handle 2 opponents. But outside, there were 6 8th tribulation universe masters. Currently, they had only 2 choices before them: fight or avoid fighting. For now, the stronghold of this paradise realm could still hold out. Get out! There was only one battle to be fought, because he knew those universe masters were coming for the treasure. Sigh! The great monk sighed, feeling that the team was hard to manage. But Divine Wood King was confident, because this time he was the biggest gainer. The withered wood here didn't help much with his own strength, but it greatly aided his Moyun Vine. The Divine Wood King's Moyun Vine already had top-tier strength at the 8th Tribulation Realm. Now, after absorbing the withered wood, it was not weaker than him, even slightly stronger. Being a plant-based life form, the enhancement from the secret technique was significant. He could use the Moyun Vine to ambush and swiftly kill a universe master at the 8th Tribulation Realm. A single battle outside might not result in a loss. That's why he advocated for it. Just as the two were deadlocked, Elder Blue, who was sitting cross-legged in the distance, suddenly opened his eyes wide. "I sense the position of the Danbao," Blue exclaimed directly, trembling with excitement all over. He had been waiting for this moment for too long. The position of the Danbao had been stationary all along, and although their positions were getting closer, the effect was minimal. But now he felt the Danbao's position, in the same spacetime as theirs and very close. If they flew out with the Great Monk's speed, they could find the Danbao in 10 years. Upon hearing Blue's words, everyone looked over. Divine Wood King and the Great Monk rushed over directly. And not just them. After entering the Universe Sea, Danbao also sensed Blue's position. However, they had been moving too fast using the teleportation array and hadn't had the chance to inform Jian Wushuang. Once they stabilized, Danbao immediately sent a message to Jian Wushuang. "Found them." Jian Wushuang's heart rejoiced upon hearing Danbao's message. He knew that the Great Monk and the others must be on their way. It's just that they weren't in the same spacetime, so it felt distant. Just as they entered the depths of the Universe Sea, they felt the other party's position. Jian Wushuang asked through transmission, "Roughly how far?" 10 years. The same as Blue's prediction of the Elder Monk's speed. The peak speed of the Great Monk was almost as fast as Jian Wushuang's universe supertravel technique. Upon hearing this distance, Jian Wushuang began to ponder. Now that he had found the Great Monk and the others' position, he was considering whether to leave the team now, taking Danbao and the others to find the Great Monk. If they left the Immortal Divine Temple now, the other side would definitely pursue them. Although they wouldn't catch up, it meant adding another enemy. But he also wanted to reconcile with the Great Monk and the others, which would give him some confidence. There was only one option left. "Danbao, before we part ways, tell Southern Saint King the location of the Great Monk and the others." Jian Wushuang's mind stirred, forming a plan. Using another's hand to kill. Upon hearing this, Danbao frowned, transmitting, "Tell Southern Saint King?" He was still a bit naive and couldn't understand Jian Wushuang's words. "Just say you've sensed the presence of metallic life form. It's at that location. I'll coordinate with you later. Whether Southern Saint King believes it or not, he'll go check it out. With our combined speed, it'll take roughly 100 years. That amount of time is nothing to the Southern Saint King." Jian Wushuang explained the plan straightforwardly, which was actually quite simple. Better to waste time than to miss the opportunity. That was the current state of the Immortal Divine Temple. Faced with the tasks from the three great divine spirits, Southern Saint King dared not be negligent, and they also understood the danger of metallic lifeform. Moreover, Danbao had always played a mysterious role. Even before entering the Universe Sea, Southern Saint King had been keeping an eye on Danbao. Now it was the same. Although he wasn't staring with his eyes, he had a thought power lingering on Danbao. Now that Danbao spoke of his discovery, Southern Saint King would definitely take notice. He wasn't afraid of the other party not acting. Danbao took a deep breath, his voice deliberately ominous as he said, "Southern Saint King?" Southern Saint King turned his head towards Danbao immediately. He had been planning the area, preparing to send people to search. Upon hearing Danbao's words, he was stunned. "You say you've sensed the location of metallic lifeform?" Southern Saint King couldn't believe it. Although he felt Danbao was somewhat mysterious, it was strange that Danbao claimed to have found the metallic lifeform just after entering the Universe Sea. He couldn't help but be suspicious. Jian Wushuang looked at the other person, disbelieving that they just revealed the coordinates, then added, "Southern Saint King, It's not even a journey of 100 years. How about we go and explore? Every search took an era of time. 100 years, what did it matter? Where did you say? Southern Saint King didn't care much about the 100 years, but he was surprised at why Danbao had discovered the location of the metallic life form so quickly. Now, upon hearing the direction Jian Wushuang mentioned, he was even more astonished, rooted to the spot. He then took out a token from his sleeve, channeled his thought energy into it, and a hologram appeared on the token. It was the universe master of the 8th tribulation realm, Chowga. Guard that cave's secret realm and don't let it escape. I'll take people over immediately. Chowga's hologram moved slightly, surprised. Should we inform the Lord Divine Spirit? Not necessary for now. Southern Saint King put away the token, then turned to Jian Wushuang, saying, if the Divine Spirits comes, the cost will be great. We need to confirm again. The location you mentioned is the cave's secret realm they discovered. Jian Wushuang exclaimed, what? Such a coincidence? They actually stumbled upon it. The great monk and divine wood king were at the secret realm discovered by Chowga. Wasn't that a bit too coincidental? Fortunately, Southern Saint King was cautious. If the divine spirits were to teleport directly, wouldn't that be a trap? The great monk and divine wood king would probably be dumbfounded, luring them in to besiege their own people. It's ridiculous just to think about it. Shooting oneself in the foot. They had done this kind of thing many times before. Every time it was just this coincidental. It's really unlucky. It seems you're right to feel that way. Perhaps the metallic life form is really there. Southern Saint King said with a smile. I didn't expect it to go so smoothly this time. Let's hurry. Jian Wushuang and the others could only awkwardly nod. If Divine Wood King and the Great Monk knew they were leading a group of 8th Tribulation Realm experts to besiege them, who knows what they would think. Although Wooly didn't know what was happening, he also felt something was amiss and secretly transmitted, Brother Wushuang, have you found the metallic life form? Jian Wushuang didn't even want to speak, his face dark as he followed behind Southern Saint King, not saying a word. For them, flying alone would take 100 years. 100 years was quick for them. There were no stops along the way. Although there were unique divine beasts in the Universe Sea, they posed no threat to them. The greatest danger in the Universe Sea was underwater. Those powerful ancient divine beasts generally lurked underwater and wouldn't actively emerge. So the divine beasts they encountered were all weak, easily dealt with. Along the way, Danbao's expression was somewhat embarrassed. Initially, he deceived Southern Saint King, claiming to have sensed the aura of the metallic life form. Now, it seemed like he really had an exceptionally strong life force, corroding plant and tree life. The vegetation withered instantly after being corroded. Scenes played out in Danbao's mind. Benefactor, the metallic life form is very likely in that cave's secret realm. The closer they got, the clearer Danbao felt. He had to tell Jian Wushuang now. There was a 90% chance. Jian Wushuang, whose face was already embarrassed, looked even more so upon hearing Danbao's words. If the metallic life form really was in that cave's secret realm, the divine spirits would surely come. How would they explain then? And how would the great monk and divine wood king be associated with the metallic life form? Without Danbao's guidance, they wouldn't have been able to find the metallic life form, right? Everything was very suspicious. If it were a coincidence, then it was too coincidental. Now there was no other way. They could only wait until the time was right. Jian Wushuang was torn between wanting to quickly deal with the metal lifeforms and wanting to meet with the great monk and divine wood king as soon as possible. But these two matters collided, turning into a mess. And they coincided to such a high degree, it was as if they were almost indistinguishable. Danbao, do you think the divine beings of the Immortal Divine Temple will believe us if we tell them the truth? Jian Wushuang was considering drastic measures. It might be better to lay everything out so everyone would have an understanding. When they arrived later, the metal lifeforms were indeed in the secret realm. The great monk and divine wood king, among others, were also in the secret realm. It was like trying to stuff mud into a pant leg. Things were getting messy. Benefactor, perhaps there's no need for this. Danbao shook his head at him, then continued via mental transmission. I can feel Elder Blue and the others' vitality. There's been no change. Although the aura of the metal lifeforms is also present, there's no connection between the two. We don't need to link the two matters. Jian Wushuang's eyes flickered. Then he suddenly smiled. At this moment, he felt that Danbao had grown up, no longer the child he once was. They decided to handle the two matters separately. Perhaps it was the most prudent course of action. If the metal life forms were in the shadows, they would enter from the shadows. If they were in the light, they would advise the Great Monk and Divine Wood King's group not to act rashly. When the divine beings descended and clashed with the metal life forms, they would quietly meet with the Great Monk and the others, then take the opportunity to slip away. Or they could simply watch and wait. If the Immortal Divine Temple couldn't handle it, they would step in to help. Resolving the situation would be the best outcome for everyone. With the source of life in the Immortal Divine Temple revived, they could also ascend to the stairway of godhood. That's settled. The two exchanged a glance. Everything understood without needing to be spoken. 100 years passed in the blink of an eye. Suddenly, with the Southern Saint King leading Jian Wushuang and the others, they arrived at the secret realm where Chaoga was located. Just before they arrived, deep beneath the sea of the Universe Sea, a huge bubble swelled up, then burst. After the burst, there was a rupture in space. Countless sea waters instantly converged on this newly opened entrance to space. As the seawater rushed in, it was forcefully pushed back by a power outside the entrance. Splash! Countless bubbles surged again. Before the bubbles burst, figures had already entered the depths of the Universe Sea through the entrance. The leader, upon entering, almost suffocated. But fortunately, an energy shield covered his body in time. Phew! Lord Babidi. This should be the core of the Wanlu universe. I don't need you to tell me, okay? Lord Babidi said coldly. If you losers hadn't led us astray, I would have been here ages ago. These people were indeed Lord Babidi and his group. Originally leaving from the city in the sky, they wandered endlessly in the savage world, unable to leave. In the end, it was the eruption of Qi Jiuxiao that continuously attacked the spacetime, opening the spacetime tunnel and entering the Universe Sea. Jian Wushuang, this time, let's see where you'll run off to? Babidi, who had just teleported there, sensed the aura of Jian Wushuang and Divine Wood King, among others, and a smirk curled up his lips as he chuckled coldly. Behind him, Qi Jiuxiao was toying with the sea beasts in the depths of the ocean. The sea beasts at the level of ordinary 8 tribulation realm, with divine power of up to 5 million, were like toys in Qi Jiuxiao's hands. With casual control, he crushed the divine bodies of the sea beasts. Stop playing around. It's time to get serious. Babidi raised his hand and took out the cosmic ship, hovering it above the seabed. Although Qi Jiuxiao was somewhat reluctant to stop playing, he didn't dare to disobey Babidi's command and obediently boarded the ship. The other powerful beings also followed suit. But the number of people was somewhat reduced. Now only a few remained. In the endless wilderness, they had encountered several terrifying wild beasts, each possessing millions of divine power. It was inevitable that a few would die. The cosmic ship instantly activated, breaking through the surface of the Universe Sea and, after a moment's pause, began to accelerate in the direction they intended to go. The pressure of the Universe Sea seemed unable to interfere with this ship. Surprisingly, it could travel at high speed without consuming divine power. Ordinary flying treasures usually required powerful individuals to inject divine power to manipulate them. But this boat did not require such manipulation. Such was the difference between treasures from different time and space. The vehicle flew towards Jian Wushuang and his group's direction. Their only target was the Danbao. Outside the secret realm of the cave, Jian Wushuang and the others were gathered together, discussing how to enter. They had been here for tens of thousands of years and still couldn't break open this secret realm. Now, hearing that there might be metal life forms hidden inside the secret realm made them even more reluctant to forcefully open it. They were anxious outside, but inside, chaos erupted. Divine Wood King and the others, who had been preparing to rush out, found that Jian Wushuang was also getting closer. So they refrained from acting. Isn't it surprising to see Jian Wushuang mixing with those indigenous powerhouses outside? Fortunately, through Elder Blue's transmission, Danbao explained what had happened along the way, which stabilized them. The most important thing now was to cooperate with the external powerhouses to find the metal lifeforms. It was precisely because of the metal lifeforms that they were in such a panic. I never thought that damn metal lifeforms would be in this secret realm. Divine Wood King cursed angrily. Why do we always encounter such things? He was also frustrated. After finally finding Jian Wushuang and the others, they couldn't leave. The great monk was much calmer. After some thought, he spoke. We don't need to panic, everyone. Didn't Jian Wushuang say it? The metal lifeforms is hidden, so let's deal with it in secret. Let's collaborate with those indigenous powerhouses and let them take the lead. We can just sit back and watch the show. You make it sound easy. Lord Hengmu sneered. Are you thinking too lightly of those people? They are 6 universe masters at the 8 tribulation realm, not a bunch of fools. His words had just come out when a loud rumble came from outside. Everyone looked towards the entrance of the secret realm. A black aura was dispersing. They really dare to attack. Everyone was startled. They had just said they weren't that foolish. And yet, those universe masters from outside didn't think much and directly attacked. Even Jian Wushuang outside was stunned. He had only mentioned the approximate location of the metal lifeforms, but these 8 tribulation universe masters couldn't resist taking action. Great Monk wanted to stop them, but he couldn't. All he could do was console. Since you all can track the target, it's simple. Even if you scare the snake and let it escape, you can find it again. Why not just break open this secret realm first? By then, let the divine beings come down personally. We can only do that. Jian Wushuang sighed. He was insignificant here, what could he stop? 6 of these 8 tribulation universe masters, led by Chaoga, besieged the secret realm. They were preparing to forcefully open the secret realm. Inside the secret realm, the great monk and divine Wood King asked Danbao through Elder Blue what was happening. With such intensity of attack, it was likely that the secret realm would be broken open. What to do then? Chaoga and the others initially came to study the secret realm. After all, for treasures. They couldn't act rashly. If they forcibly broke open the secret realm, the treasures inside might be damaged. So they dared not make a move. Now that they knew the metal lifeforms was inside, they gave up on the treasures inside the secret realm and focused solely on capturing the metal lifeforms, without any reservations in their actions. Everyone, don't panic. This pocket dimension can still withstand. Elder Blue inquired about the situation from Danbao. Receiving a reassurance, he could only comfort everyone for the time being. But before he could finish his sentence, the pocket dimension began to crack. Could collapse at any moment. What would they do once they got out? They shouldn't make things worse for themselves. Failing to find the metallic life form, they attracted attacks from those universe masters. It was precisely at this moment that a powerful aura began to rise from the depths of the sea. That aura was most familiar to Jian Wushuang. The overwhelming death chi and the towering figure were already imprinted in their minds. Boom! A massive cosmic ship burst out from the seafloor. In an instant, it appeared before everyone. Compared to this cosmic ship, the pocket dimension seemed extremely tiny. When Chaoga and the others saw the appearance of the cosmic ship, they were stunned and stopped in their tracks. This relieved the people inside the pocket dimension. It stopped. Divine Wood King's telepathy spread outward, sensing the familiar aura. His face changed drastically, reminding, "Don't relax. It's Babidi and his group." But this was also their opportunity. Babidi and his group carried the power of death, while the Immortal Divine Temple was searching for the consumption of life force. Seeing Qi Zhouxiao, there would inevitably be a great battle. Then it would be their chance. For a moment, the people inside the pocket dimension held their breath. Qi Zhouxiao, with his overwhelming strength against 6 universe masters at the 8 tribulations realm, as well as several top experts at the 8 tribulations realm. That was definitely a battle worth watching. Without the divine power of countless super-strong individuals, they would not be enough to participate in this battle. Outside the pocket dimension, Jian Wushuang saw the cosmic ship. His face darkened. He didn't expect Babidi to catch up with them so quickly. This was going to get lively. One wrong move and they could perish. Hee hee. You guys sure run fast. Splash. The hatch opened, and Babidi stepped out first. Qi Zhouxiao and Dylan also walked out of the cabin behind him. The likes of Hun Tian followed suit, feeling the powerful auras from the outside. Not only did their brows furrow, but there was also fear in their eyes. But Babidi didn't care, and Qi Zhouxiao completely ignored those people. Even universe masters at the Eight Tribulations realm, despite having limitless divine power, were only at the peak of the Eight Tribulations realm in terms of combat power. Qi Zhouxiao was at the half-step 9 Tribulation realm. After the Sky City's transformation, Qi Zhouxiao's divine power had become unfathomable, reaching a level where he could rival the 9 Tribulation realm. It was far beyond what several universe masters could handle. Who are you people? Chaoga frowned, his gaze fixed on Qi Zhouxiao, unable to gauge the depth of his power but sensing a shroud of death surrounding him. This realization prompted Chaoga to immediately relay a message to the 3 great divine spirits of the Immortal Divine Temple. Ignoring Chaoga, Babidi calmly stated, Jian Wushuang, I'll give you one last chance. Hand over the Dan Bao and become my servant, and I might spare your life. Never. Jian Wushuang was resolute, his heart as unyielding as iron. He'd rather die than become a servant. With his second soul, he could start anew if needed. Treasure could be forsaken, but freedom and future were non-negotiable. Becoming a servant meant eternal bondage. Despite fearing Qi Zhouxiao's strength, they had ample manpower. They had at least 6 universe masters and figures like the Southern Saint King. Gathering 10 peak 8 Tribulation realm experts was not an issue. They could withstand Qi Zhouxiao. There's nothing more to discuss then. Babidi sneered coldly and waved his hand menacingly. Suddenly, Qi Zhouxiao's figure expanded, towering like a majestic mountain in the universe sea, emanating a crimson aura. His divine power momentarily surged, breaking through 15 million. This startled both Chaoga and the Southern Saint King. They realized that this mysterious newcomer was connected to Jian Wushuang and the others. Before they could inquire further, Danbao stepped forward and exclaimed, Babidi, you've destroyed my source of life, and now you seek to destroy the very essence of Wanliu's life? This statement not only puzzled Babidi but also shocked the native powerhouses present. Source of life? Essence of life. To Babidi, Danbao's words didn't seem entirely wrong. Qi Zhouxiao was the one who destroyed Danbao's shield of life, a direct connection to him. But the source of life within Wanlu and the stairway to godhood were his ultimate goals. No one could hinder him. Therefore, he didn't find Danbao's words particularly significant. He thought Danbao was simply unwilling to accept his fate and was venting before death. However, to Jian Wushuang and the others, it wasn't so simple. Danbao's words weren't directed at Babidi but at Chaoga and the others. After hearing this covert revelation, Chaoga and the Southern Saint King began to feel uneasy. They glanced at Danbao and chose to relay a message to Jian Wushuang. At this juncture, if you remain silent, we'll wash our hands of this. Southern Saint King felt they were being played by Jian Wushuang and the others, his expression a mix of anger and cunning, though deep down, he still intended to deceive Jian Wushuang. Upon hearing this, Jian Wushuang inwardly sneered, though his expression instantly changed to one of shock. He hurriedly sent a message, pretending to be frightened. Respected seniors, it's not that I wanted to conceal this, but the matter is too significant, involving the fate of the higher heavens and the entire Great Sky Dome world. As you've heard, their plan is to destroy the entire essence of Wanlu, the source of this spacetime. If that happens, we'll all be doomed. Humph! You, a universe master at the 6th Tribulation realm, you expect us to risk our lives based on just your words. Chaoga's expression shifted, clearly dissatisfied with Jian Wushuang's statement and wanting to know more. Although his demeanor showed such defiance, deep down, he was profoundly shocked. It concerned the origin of the entire spacetime. In fact, they had long suspected this place might be within the universe of some superpowerhouse. They just couldn't break through. Now, after hearing Jian Wushuang's words, they were starting to understand. If you don't believe, you can go feel Danbao's origin source for yourself and see if his body really contains what you call the source of life. Jian Wushuang paused, reminding Danbao to reveal his source of life. Then he continued, "He is life and life is Danbao. If he dies, the source of life will disappear. Don't believe it? You can try." Chaoga, along with Southern Saint King and the other universe masters at the 8th Tribulation Realm, all turned to look at Danbao. By now, Danbao had already taken out the life sphere he had refined, with faint cracks on its surface due to Qi Jiuxiao attack. Seeing that sphere, Chaoga's gaze focused, and thunder seemed to echo in his heart. He directly transmitted this scene to the 3 great divine spirits within the Immortal Divine Temple. Upon seeing the sphere, the 3 divine spirits in the Immortal Divine Temple also had their expressions drastically changed. The 3 of them only paused for a second after seeing the sphere before their figures flashed, directly entering the core of the Immortal Divine Temple. There was a huge altar there. On the altar there was a groove. That groove was where the power of life was born. Now it was desolate. Above the altar there was also a huge platform. Once, the 3 great divine spirits had spared no effort to enshrine their divine images on it. But they couldn't succeed. They didn't pay much attention to this. Instead, they had a burning gaze towards the sphere in Danbao's hand. "We must obtain it." "But—" Zhang Huiyan flicked his robe, shouting angrily, "There's no but. No matter what connection he has with the origin source in the depths of the universe sea, we must snatch that sphere. Even if this place collapses, even if what Jian Wushuang said about the Wanlu World Willows is true, so what? If they were really just surviving within the universe of some powerhouse, then there would be no further hope. Only by breaking out could they stand tall. If the Wanlu world were destroyed, so be it. They could leave with the treasures. By then, what relation would this place have to them? For the sake of becoming stronger, let alone their hometown worlds, even beloved ones could be abandoned. At their level, some things were no longer satisfying. Only greater unknowns could excite them. Let's go all out. The 3 of them spoke in unison, as if they were one person. At this moment, the Immortal Divine Temple also began to stir. Ready to teleport at any time, Jian Wushuang and the others in the depths of the universe sea were unaware of the thoughts of the 3 great divine spirits. At this moment, Jian Wushuang had portrayed Danbao as the savior of the Wanlu world. It wasn't fabricated by him, but true. However, to prevent Chaoga and the others from suspecting, he still concealed his identity from the outside world. "You guys step back. Leave this to us." Chaoga had already received the divine message from the 3 great divine spirits to protect Danbao. As for Qi Jiuxiao, they had ways to hold him back. As long as the 3 great divine spirits came, they could fight. The terrifying divine power of the 3 great divine spirits. Everyone remembered. "Get ready." Babiti's eyes darted, catching Jian Wushuang and the others communicating through voice transmission. Though he was confident in Qi Jiuxiao's strength, he still feared unexpected incidents. After all, he had encountered such accidents many times before. He failed to capture them in the Wanlu Divine Realm and almost seized the Danbao in the City of the Sky, only to have them escape again. This time, he didn't want his plans to be ruined again. For the sake of controlling the path to resurrection. He had waited too long for this. At the end of the path of resurrection, there was something he desired. That thing even made Mieshang tremble with fear. Once obtained, he could return to the starry sky, look down upon everything, and reclaim what he had lost. Boom! Qi Jiuxiao surged forward on endless seawater. The power emanating from his divine power could crush even the top experts of the 8 Tribulation Realm. Now, only the peak experts of the 8 Tribulation Realm could barely contend with Qi Jiuxiao. And it would take a group of them. The 6 universe masters of the Immortal Divine Temple acted first. The armor on Chaoga's body emitted endless light, illuminating the sea area, and his divine power surged to 12 million. At the same time, the Tao arena descended, crashed into the universe sea. With the blessing of divine power, it had reached 14 million. He was the strongest among the universe masters of the 8 tribulation present. Shang Luo spear. With a wave of Chaoga's hand, a sharply black spear appeared in his hand, surrounded by countless thunderbolts and gathering endless universe origin source. The spear swung, sweeping through the endless seawater, straight towards Qi Juxiao. Feeling the endless power contained above the spear, Qi Juxiao not only did not panic but was somewhat excited. He directly clasped his hands and stood in front of Chaoga, allowing the latter to manipulate as he pleased. Not only did his divine power not weaken, it surged to 16 million. Chaoga's arms were somewhat numb from the shock. He tried everything he could, but couldn't even injure the other party. Attack together. Now he was somewhat at a loss, calling everyone to attack together, and also secretly communicating with the 3 great divine spirits. He originally thought the 3 great divine spirits would use the immortal divine temple to teleport over. But at this moment, the 3 great divine spirits, hearing about Qi Juxiao's formidable strength, wanted to conserve enough life force, so they didn't directly teleport to this place using the immortal divine temple. Instead, they teleported to the teleportation array. Relying on the teleportation array's transmission, they could save a lot of life force. But just because of this saving, several 8 tribulation realm experts fell in an instant on the battlefield here. The scattered tribulation experts brought by Southern Saint King directly became cannon fodder. The top forces of the 8 tribulation realm had not even come into contact with Qi Juxiao before being crushed by his aura. They didn't have the life force to restore their divine bodies, so they fell on the spot. Southern Saint King felt palpitations and stayed behind to protect Jian Wushuang and the others, not daring to approach. At this moment, they finally witnessed Qi Juxiao's terror. Ha! Qi Juxiao stretched out his hands and shouted angrily. He truly began to act. Despite his towering figure, he was extremely agile, shuttling through space-time, ignoring those Tao arenas. He could even break through the space-time of the universe sea. Those Tao arenas of the universe masters of the 8 tribulation could easily be torn apart by him. Although they could sustain themselves with the origin source universe, it had been torn apart, causing significant losses to them. Their foundational reserves were nearly depleted. If the divine spirits don't come soon, we're finished. Someone's face revealed despair, because Qi Juxiao's divine power was still soaring. Hissing. The tearing of space-time caused a universe to collapse instantly. An 8th tribulation universe master became a scattered tribulation, losing their own origin source universe. This scene left Jian Wushuang and the others speechless. Chaoga didn't have time to look, only feeling a chill down his spine, and as he turned, he saw the terrifying face of Qi Juxiao. He hastily retreated in fear. Bab Edi reminded from the side, "Stop playing around. Hurry and kill them." Although Qi Juxiao had been effortlessly crushing everything in his path, Bab Edi still felt uneasy. He felt like something was watching them, but he couldn't pinpoint where. And the owner of those eyes seemed familiar. It was something he had encountered in the starry sky. Something that shouldn't be present here. So he couldn't help but worry. That presence was indeed surrounding them. Only Bab Edi felt a palpitation, not from the presence, but from a premonition. Neither Jian Wushuang nor Danbao noticed, but at this moment in the secret realm, some subtle changes were occurring. The withered grass and dilapidated trees were now covered in countless silver threads. These threads were silver throughout. They couldn't be captured by the naked eye, but they were incredibly fast. Soon they covered all the withered wood. Divine Wood King was the first to notice something was amiss. He had been using thought power to observe the battle in the outside world, and seeing Qi Juxiao's dominance, he felt nervous. According to his and Jian Wushuang's plan, it was almost time to make a move. But Qi Juxiao's strength made them hesitate. They feared that if they went out, they would be completely wiped out. They wanted to wait a bit longer. However, while waiting, they noticed changes in the dead wood in front of them. There was no aura above them originally, but now, there was a special vitality. The silver lines became more and more apparent. Just as Divine Wood King lowered his head to look, a howl came from behind him. Ah! This startled everyone, and they quickly turned to look. Even Divine Wood King, who had been observing the withered wood, turned to look. They saw a seventh tribulation strongman, now covered in silver threads that filled his eyeballs, causing him to scream in agony. This person was a close friend of Lianxing. Naturally, Lianxing wouldn't just stand by. He rushed forward to help, but was stopped by Lord Hengmu. "Let Zui Yehue handle it." Lord Hengmu's expression was stern. Lianxing paused for a moment, then stopped. Zui Yehue was a war beast, similar to a puppet, whose body had been modified. If there was real danger, it wouldn't backlash. Whoosh! After receiving the command, Zui Yehue stepped forward and directly approached the seventh tribulation strongman. Its claws were about to touch him, but before they could, the silver threads extended along Zui Yehue's claws. Not good. Lord Hengmu's expression changed drastically as he raised his hand to attack. This startled everyone. They felt Lord Hengmu was overreacting a bit. Attacking at this moment might injure their own people. But before they could persuade him, they saw the seventh tribulation strongman, who had been initially entangled by the silver threads, actually turning into silver. The constitution of life was instantly altered. The whole person transformed into a silver puppet, unexpectedly breaking through Zui Yehue's chest with a single punch. It's worth noting that Zui Yehue is one of the top war beasts in the 8 tribulation realm. To break through Zui Yehue's divine body with just one punch was terrifying beyond belief. Even peak experts in the 8 tribulation realm would find it difficult to accomplish. Buzz! At this moment, Lord Hengmu made his move, albeit a bit late, hastily shouting, "Stop standing there dumbfounded, quickly kill him, or we'll all be done for. Don't get close to those withered trees." Divine Wood King at this moment remembered the silver lines he had just seen on the withered trees and was the first to soar into the air. The great monk, who had originally been sitting on a wooden stump, stood up upon hearing the warning, turned around, and smashed the stump he had been sitting on into powder with a raised hand. Within the powder, however, countless silver threads emerged, rushing toward the great monk. For a moment, everyone was in chaos. With the first one controlled, several other 7th Tribulation Realm experts were subsequently controlled by the silver threads, launching indiscriminate attacks on those before them. The cave's secret realm was completely thrown into chaos. And beneath the cave's secret realm, they were unaware that there was still a silver pyramid hidden. The pyramid continued to choose, and the silver threads emerged from it. This time, there was no need for external experts to attack. The cave's secret realm began to crumble on its own. Divine Wood King and the others also took the opportunity to flee. Compelled, facing the unknown fear, they would rather confront Qi Zhouxiao. Outside the cave's secret realm, Jian Wushuang and the others, who had been suppressed by Qi Zhouxiao's divine power, only now realized that the cave's secret realm had silently shattered, and countless silver threads were spreading out from the cave's secret realm. "What's this?" Wu Li looked at the threads, somewhat puzzled. Danbao, however, immediately sensed something amiss, fear appearing in his eyes like never before, and turned to Jian Wushuang, shouting loudly, "Quick, run!" Before Jian Wushuang could react, several voices shouted in unison. "Master, run! Jian Wushuang, take Danbao and go! Hurry!" Countless shouts left Jian Wushuang with no time to think. He grabbed Danbao and immediately unleashed the three-quake universe, even forgetting about Wu Li beside him, and Southern Saint King. He had no idea what was happening. In an instant, however, the cave's secret realm shattered. A group of unfamiliar experts rushed out, and then they saw Jian Wushuang running away behind them. Only Wu Li remained dumbfounded. But with a blink of an eye, even Wu Li disappeared from sight. Looking up, being carried by a bald old monk, he had already fled far away. The silver threads, however, rushed toward the nearest tribulation realm expert. Although Southern Saint King didn't know what these threads were, he didn't dare to take it lightly and quickly retreated. Chaoga and the others were still battling Qi Zhouxiao. Seeing Jian Wushuang fleeing with Dan Bao and then glancing back at the shattered cave's secret realm, they were somewhat at a loss. These people were still kept in the dark. But Babidi recognized those silver threads. Or rather, he recognized the silver pyramid within the shattered cave's secret realm. Damn it! Babidi clenched his small claws, staring angrily at the silver pyramid, and shouted, Qi Jiuxiao, come back! Jian Wushuang had already fled with Dan Bao. He didn't want to confront that silver pyramid. Although he had confidence, it was still quite tricky. He wanted Dan Bao, not trouble with someone else. Upon hearing Babidi's words, Qi Jiuxiao was about to break away. In fact, breaking away was as simple as turning back. Chaoga and the other universe masters were completely on the defensive, just struggling to hold their ground. If they could withstand it, that would be considered lucky. Everything happened too quickly, in just a few breaths. If it had been any slower, they might have perished. Boom! The sound of the cave's secret realm shattering finally came. The speed of sound was vastly different from the speed of light. They had just seen the cave's secret realm shatter, took a breath, and only then did they hear this deafening explosion. Qi Jiuxiao didn't take a step forward when he felt a piercing pain in his back. It was the same sensation as when he faced Jian Wushuang's reincarnation sword last time. Damn! Qi Jiuxiao erupted in complete fury. Ignoring everything, he unleashed numerous rainbow-colored beams from his hands, blasting towards the shattered secret realm behind him. Amidst the blaze, one could see dozens of silver puppets standing amidst the broken realm, along with a silver pyramid. Above the pyramid, there was a triangular crystal from which an attack had just burst out, stinging Qi Jiuxiao. Buzz! Facing Qi Jiuxiao's frenzied assault, the pyramid emitted continuous buzzing noises. Several halos flickered around it. Babidi saw Qi Jiuxiao going berserk and shouted loudly, "Don't attack it!" But the warning came too late. All of Qi Jiuxiao's attacks were absorbed by the pyramid. Now, beneath the pyramid, a pitch-black opening appeared. After a buzzing sound, countless metallic insects surged out of the opening. Each of those metallic insects possessed divine power in the millions. There were tens of thousands of metallic insects in total. If they were to escape, they could destroy the entire ancient moon spacetime. Even the entire northern spacetime could face annihilation. Chaoga and the others had just breathed a sigh of relief and were about to transmit their message to the three great divine spirits. Mainly because they weren't sure what had happened suddenly. The secret realm shattered, and a group of unfamiliar powerhouses emerged, seeming to know Jian Wushuang, and then they ran away. The key was they couldn't stop them. Now, seeing those metallic insects, they felt utterly hopeless. Divine spirits, come quickly. Chaoga's throat was almost torn apart. Metallic insects filled the sky. They obscured the sun. The divine power on the insects overshadowed the universe sea. Babidi furrowed his brow. After calling Qi Jiuxiao back, he led everyone directly into the cosmic ship. Hun Tian and the others didn't know what had happened, but seeing Babidi's expression, they didn't dare to ask. Looking at the ugly scene through the cosmic ship's window, Babidi's expression softened, and he said coldly, "There's no need to be afraid. As long as we don't attack that silver pyramid, there's no threat. The divine power of these metallic insects is only temporary. I'm afraid if they're attacked a few times at will, their divine power will dry up. Could it be that the divine power of these metallic insects comes from Qi Jiuxiao's attacks?" The realization dawned on the crowd at this moment. Babidi nodded and said, "Correct. It comes from Qi Jiuxiao's attacks." This, Hun Tian gasped in shock, then continued, "To think that such heaven-defying means exist in this world, absorbing Qi Jiuxiao's attacks and then converting them into their own divine power to create those metallic insects. And there were tens of thousands of them. Qi Jiuxiao's attack just now lasted only a moment. Even though in an instant it might unleash a million attacks, it's impossible to absorb and convert them all completely. It's akin to devouring, but the conversion rate is only 20%. It's not a life form from your timeline, so it can't be speculated with common sense. There are things you don't know. This silver pyramid should come from another timeline. I've encountered similar life forms in the starry sky before. Seems to be from the southern spacetime. Babidi recalled slightly and gave an answer. There wasn't much worry about this. Although attacking the pyramid would only make it stronger, there were ways to crack it. One way is to break through with sheer force. As long as the divine power is strong enough, everything can be destroyed naturally. Perhaps only a ninth tribulation realm expert could do this. Currently, Qi Juxiao is not strong enough to break it. But there are other ways. Sealing, suppression, or entering the interior of the pyramid to destroy the metal lifeform controlling it. These are all methods. As for those metal crawlers, although each possesses millions of divine powers, they are extremely fragile because they lack divine bodies, only having divine power. Although their attack power is high, they have no defense whatsoever. Not to mention Qi Juxiao, even those universe masters from the outside world can kill a large group of them in one go. But with tens of thousands of them, it's not worth it to trade lives. Even if it's 1 for 100. At this time, Chowga and the others also noticed that although the attacks of the metal crawlers were powerful, they had no defense at all. The Shang Luo spear was swung in a wide arc, sweeping away a large swath of them. But being surrounded by those metal crawlers still posed a risk of falling. But they could barely manage. And at this moment, ripples suddenly appeared in the surrounding spacetime, and a majestic palace loomed faintly. The immortal divine temple is about to descend. Let's go! After seeing the shadow of the temple, Babidi manipulated the cosmic ship and chased after Jian Wushuang and the others. The speed of the cosmic ship was not slow. In just a blink of an eye, it rushed out of this battlefield, causing waves of thousands of feet to rise in the sea below. The immortal divine temple descends. The 3 major divine spirits were ready to take action, but they didn't see the mysterious strong person mentioned by Chowga and the others, nor Jian Wushuang and the others. They could only reluctantly deal with those metal insects. But crucially, they didn't know that they couldn't attack the pyramid. In the depths of the universe sea, an elliptical light spot kept flickering and shrinking. Every blink would change its position, but the distance in between was extremely far. If an 8th tribulation realm expert simply flew, it would take an hour. Even a universe master would need a quarter of an hour. But the light spot only needed a breath. This is the 3-quake universe travel technique. It's the peak secret method newly improved by Jian Wushuang. These 3 epochs. Not only have they revamped the secret method of universe super travel, even his super eternal ancient transformation has improved a lot. But it's still far from the full-powered super eternal ancient transformation. The current enhancement is only 70 times. The complete super eternal ancient transformation will reach 100-fold. That's the strongest transformation. Danbao, do you think that pyramid just now is a metal lifeform? Jian Wushuang asked while traversing the universe. Danbao, who was extremely sensitive to such matters, complied with the inheritance information from the source of life and knew the origin of the pyramid and its function inside. He told Jian Wushuang about it. After listening, Jian Wushuang, like Hun Tian and the others, had a somewhat dazed look. Such heaven-defying means. In his view, it's impossible. But in the distant southern spacetime, it's commonplace. Benefactor, don't worry too much. I can see that the metal origin source inside that pyramid is very fragile. If we can enter the interior of the pyramid, it's easy to defeat them. As for those metal crawler insects, without divine bodies but only some weak life force contained in the thin metal, as well as absorbing Qi Juxiao's divine power, even if we don't attack them, they won't pose a threat even if they act a few times. Danbao explained calmly. Jian Wushuang nodded, taking a breath before speaking. There must be something else that made you so anxious to make me escape just now. The transformation of Danbao had indeed been significant, indicating the possibility of even more terrifying events unfolding. At that moment, before Danbao could explain, they both felt a violent force sweeping in from behind. Even from such a distance, it managed to affect the two of them. The great monk and others further back were almost engulfed by the storm. Babidi's control over the cosmic ship nearly faltered, barely managing to hold steady. This wave of turbulence spread throughout the depths of the universe sea. At the outer edges of the cosmos, the waters began to recede. This was the divine power being consumed by the universe sea. Danbao glanced down at the descending sea of divine power, speaking solemnly. This is the core of the Wanlu universe. Metal life forms are not tolerated here. Once the universe sea detects them, it automatically protects the origin source, using the divine power of the sea to eliminate the threat. This is a fortunate turn of events. Does this mean we don't need to worry about that metal life form anymore? Jian Wushuang's expression brightened, but he had misunderstood. He thought Danbao was concerned they might be caught in the vortex of self-purification within the universe sea. Upon hearing Jian Wushuang's words, Danbao shook his head with a wry smile. It's not that simple. That silver pyramid can absorb divine power attacks. Naturally, it can absorb the divine power sea. As soon as these words were spoken, Jian Wushuang suddenly understood. His figure trembled, muttering to himself, No wonder that pyramid would hide in a cave's secret realm instead of drifting in the universe sea. Last time, when we found it, it was just outside a cave's secret realm, and this time it entered the cave's secret realm, absorbing life and divine power within, concealing itself from being cleared by the law rules above the universe sea. However, there was one thing he didn't quite understand, but he had a guess. Danbao, if you step onto the stairway of godhood, will it interfere with the law rules of the universe sea? Danbao understood what he meant, nodding. Yes, once I step onto the stairway, I'm afraid the law rules of the universe sea will collapse. By then, that silver pyramid can devour the divine power sea without restraint. Perhaps before I become a god, endless metal serpents will be born on the other side, destroying everything. The stairway will also shatter. This is what Realm King is worried about, so he wants us to kill that metal life form first. This time, Jian Wushuang fully understood. No wonder Realm King was so worried. It wasn't just about the divine power sea. The paradises that drifted from the depths of the origin source were the same. They were all part of the Wanlu origin source. If the strong from the immortal divine temple or the higher heavens took them away, they'd be gone. They were their own people. They were also part of the Wanlu origin source. The three divine spirits foolishly thought that by taking treasures, they could ignore the fate of their homeland. Once the Wanlu divine tree collapsed, all life nurtured by it would perish. The downfall of the higher heavens represented everything. The silver-gilded pyramid, possibly originating from the higher heavens, had devoured a portion of its essence, causing all the strong beings from there to vanish completely. Jian Wushuang shook off the drag from the vortex behind him and came to a halt. Facing the metallic life forms was inevitable. Escaping wasn't an option. The rules of the universe sea weren't sufficient to clear that pyramid. At most, they could clear out those metallic crawlers. Initially, when Jian Wushuang sensed those crawlers, he felt like the sky was falling and thought the entire northern spacetime was doomed. But upon understanding everything, suddenly, it didn't seem so daunting anymore. Compared to Qi Juxiao, at least they could still flee. Let's wait for the great monk and the others. Once everyone was together, they could discuss a plan. Currently, all sides were in motion. The biggest threat was actually Qi Juxiao. Then came the metallic life forms. Lastly, there was the Immortal Divine Temple. For now, the Immortal Divine Temple was beneficial to them. They could cooperate with the other side. This way, it would be a united front. With the Immortal Divine Temple on their side, they could deal with the metallic life forms or Babidi and his ilk together. Babidi wouldn't collaborate with the metallic life forms. Both Babidi and the metallic life forms were lone wolves. If they hadn't offended Babidi too severely before, there might have been a chance to team up with him against the metallic life forms. Unity was Jian Wushuang's specialty. After stopping for a short while, the vortex began to slow down. They didn't foolishly wait around. Instead, they turned around to find Elder Blue and the others. Just a few breaths later, they saw the gathering of people. This time, many had fallen. It could also be said that many had been controlled by the silver-gilded pyramid. Now, there were only about a dozen people left. Each one still bore injuries. Just as they gathered, Danbao was about to help them recover. This time, Jian Wushuang took the initiative to stop him and personally helped everyone restore their divine power and vitality. He wasn't as reliant on the power of life as Danbao. Without it, Danbao would truly become useless. Over the years, he had recovered quite a bit, but he still hadn't restored the source of life. Alas! Lord Hengmu squatted on the side, sighing. Although everyone's breath had stabilized, they still felt somewhat hopeless in the face of the current situation. It was only when Jian Wushuang personally explained the origin and background of the silver-gilded pyramid that the atmosphere eased a bit. It wasn't that their resilience was lacking. The scene just now would have even made the current Grand Pope of the ancient Moon Temple too frightened to move. Suddenly, tens of thousands of divine power metal monsters appeared. Who wouldn't be afraid? Brother Wushuang, did you come back suddenly because you have a plan? Divine Wood King spoke up and many people looked over. All eyes turned to Jian Wushuang. A plan? Jian Wushuang took a deep breath. He hadn't actually thought of a plan yet, but with so many people looking at him, he became even more nervous and couldn't think of one. So he turned to look at Danbao. Seeing Danbao's blank expression, he regretted it. Just as he was about to come up with a lie to stabilize everyone, something suddenly came to his mind. A grand hall, the immortal divine temple, the absolute treasure of the great sky dome world. The immortal divine temple, Jian Wushuang blurted out, then looked at Danbao and said, Danbao, didn't you say there's something resonating with your source of life inside the immortal divine temple? Yes. Danbao didn't understand what he meant, just nodded dumbly. Buzz. He had also sensed resonance from the immortal divine temple. It was similar to the resonance with the Skysite heavenly chessboard. Perhaps the immortal divine temple was much stronger than the Skysite heavenly chessboard, but he had felt the resonance, which indicated that the immortal divine temple was a temporal treasure. Danbao also felt the resonance from above, related to the power of life. A temporal treasure. A life treasure. Danbao could feel the resonance, most likely because of the life treasure he had refined. They all could feel it. Jian Wushuang refused to believe that the three divine spirits couldn't feel it. If it weren't for this resonance, why would they imprison them? Plus, Danbao had actively brought out that treasure before. The immortal divine temple, after descending, didn't find Jian Wushuang and the others' whereabouts. Instead, it first rescued Chaoga and the others. Before clashing with the metallic crawlers, the low rules of the Universe Sea descended, stirring up a storm. Everyone took refuge in the immortal divine temple. The silver-gilded pyramid also took those tribulation realm powerhouses transformed into metallic puppets into the pyramid. These metallic puppets weren't transformed from divine power like the metallic crawler insects, but had true divine bodies and a constant stream of divine power. After the transition from the 7th Tribulation Realm to the 8th Tribulation Realm, they possessed the peak power of the 8th Tribulation Realm. Each divine power reached a level of 15 million, similar to the peak state of Great Monk and Divine Wood King. However, the metallic lifeforms inside the Silver Pyramid, controlling the metallic puppets, were limited to only 10. The rest were killed. This was good news for Jian Wushuang and his companions. After consolidating their forces, they still had hope. Of course, they relied on the immortal divine temple. At this moment, the immortal divine temple was deep within the vortex. The three great divine spirits inside the hall remained calm. The external divine power storms couldn't interfere with the interior of the temple at all. Being called the immortal divine temple and being a treasure of spacetime, how could it not withstand such attacks? Give me 3 breaths of time, and I can lock onto Jian Wushuang's aura. He's with Danbao, and we can teleport over. Xianxia manipulated the immortal divine temple, his brow furrowed as he searched for Jian Wushuang's specific location amidst the chaotic divine power storm. Teleportation by the temple consumed a vast amount of energy. This time, they teleported here not for the metallic lifeforms but for Danbao. Unfortunately, like Babidi and his group, they also came up empty-handed. But at least they could teleport to lock onto Jian Wushuang and the others. Babidi and his group were truly in a sorry state. Despite having the strongest force, Qi Zhouxiao, they repeatedly failed. This made Babidi extremely frustrated as he tried to break free from the storm and locate Jian Wushuang and the others. With Qi Juxiao's powerful thought power, he directly covered half of the universe. This time, Jian Wushuang and the others truly had no way to escape. They were besieged by two powerful opponents. Yet Jian Wushuang remained calm. He knew the immortal divine temple could teleport. At this moment, he deliberately exposed his aura to lure the immortal divine temple over. And this time, he didn't seek cooperation. It wasn't because he was confident in himself, but because he trusted Danbao. Danbao, this time it's up to you. Jian Wushuang glanced at Danbao. He truly had no other solution this time. He couldn't always rely on gambling. If it went wrong, they would all perish. Danbao was a candidate for the god of life, and there were some things that Danbao had to accomplish on his own. Relying on others wasn't an option. Jian Wushuang once relied on his teacher, but their departure taught him greater resilience. He endured his time in the Great Sea region. Especially before entering the Great Sea region, witnessing Ding Bai's peerless swordsmanship fueled his aspirations even more. Some people are just passers-by. Yet they leave behind boundless aspirations and an upward perseverance. Wanting to become stronger requires one's own efforts. Danbao was actually quite fortunate. From an unknown youngster to soaring heights. Becoming a god. Wasn't this a leap? To Jian Wushuang, it was the greatest leap. And the greatest opportunity. From one small world to another, he gradually glimpsed the truth of the universe. The universe, space-time, the starry sky. Everything became clear, the path lay ahead. To become powerful, one must keep moving forward. Just like this time entering the Wanlu divine tree. Originally, he had reasons not to enter. Was it just because of Weiss's words? Or because of the extreme freedom intent technique? Neither. It was his own desire for adventure. That was what mattered most. Jian Wushuang scanned the crowd and said in a low voice, "Everyone, elevate your aura to the highest." Buzz. Though uncertain, everyone complied. Divine Wood King and the Great Monk, two pinnacle 8th Tribulation Realm powerhouses, erupted without reservation. Divine power directly broke through 15 million. Behind Divine Wood King, a huge vine, the Mayun vine, surged into the sky, similarly erupting with the aura of the pinnacle 8th Tribulation Realm. Currently, Divine Wood King exhibited the strongest combat power, with the Mayun vine at the pinnacle 8th Tribulation Realm. Divine Wood King's strength could overpower other 8th Tribulation Realm powerhouses, reaching the limit of the 8th Tribulation Realm. If they progressed further, they would have half a step into the realm of the 9th Tribulation. They were the strongest among the powerful figures present, both in terms of foundation and potential. After all, he was peak experts of the ancient 8th Tribulation Realm, who had once refined life treasures. And he also possessed the Mayun vine. As for the Great Monk, although his initial strength was formidable, his subsequent improvements were not significant. Far from being comparable to Divine Wood King. Now, he was already firmly suppressed by Divine Wood King. However, he showed no signs of discontent, instead appearing quite indifferent. The aura of everyone erupted. The seawater below instantly boiled. Divine power filled the surrounding space, and ripples of space oscillated around. Why haven't they arrived yet? Jian Wushuang frowned. Although he didn't know much about the Immortal Divine Temple, he remembered that Chaoga and others had been very confident in the Immortal Divine Temple's teleportation abilities. It should have arrived by now after 2 breaths. Jian Wushuang believed that the teleportation should have been instantaneous. And it was pretty close to what he thought. The teleportation of the Immortal Divine Temple was indeed fast, but it required a vast amount of life force to support it. In the current Immortal Divine Temple, the source of life had already dried up, making it tricky to activate the fastest teleportation. The most important thing was to capture the aura during teleportation. Inside the temple, Zhang Wuya poured all his thought power into the Immortal Divine Temple, desperately trying to capture the divine aura of Jian Wushuang and the others. They knew that Jian Wushuang could conceal his aura, so they were somewhat worried. Fortunately, there were still some people whose aura couldn't be hidden. But when he used his mental power to search, he discovered a huge aura erupting above the universe sea, like a sun. Found it! Jiang Wuya's eyes flashed with excitement. The two divine spirits beside him immediately mobilized the remaining life force in the immortal divine temple. Following Jiang Wuya's locked position, they began to perform the immortal teleportation. Buzz! The surrounding space collapsed actively. This was even more intense than the storm that wiped out foreign entities in the sea of divine power. Space collapsed, time flowed backward. The massive immortal divine temple vanished in an instant without a trace. Only the silver pyramid in the storm remained. As for those metal insects, they had long been cleared away by the storm. Outside the storm, Babiti's manipulation of the cosmic ship also escaped the engulfing storm. Just after escaping, they sensed a powerful divine power fluctuation in the distance. It was definitely not the innate divine power of the universe sea. This point could still be analyzed by Babiti based on the information from Qi Zhouxiao. Without hesitation, he manipulated the cosmic ship to burst at full speed towards the position of Jian Wushuang and the others. Meanwhile, the immortal divine temple had already subtly arrived. The loud buzzing shook Jian Wushuang and the others continuously backward. "They're here!" Jian Wushuang took a deep breath, looking at the almost tangible immortal divine temple that had instantly arrived before them. The immense pressure and ancient buzzing made them all feel apprehensive. This kind of power far surpassed his chessboard. Could even be said that compared to this immortal divine temple, the Skysite heavenly chessboard was like a baby meeting a martial arts master. Everyone was stunned on the spot. Originally, the strong ones who faced the immortal divine temple, like Divine Wood King, were still somewhat confident. Because during the cave's secret realm, he had seen Chaoga and others being abused by Qi Zhouxiao. They were all wary of Qi Zhouxiao and the later appearance of the Silver Pyramid. But their attitude towards the immortal divine temple had been rather ordinary. Now, when they truly faced the immortal divine temple, an indescribable fear arose in their hearts. It was as if they were facing a true god. Words failed them. "Jian Wushuang!" A slender voice came from inside the temple. In a blink of an eye, 3 major deities emerged from the temple, accompanied by Chaoga and Southern Saint King. Jiang Wuya took the lead, stepping directly in front of everyone. With a slight movement of his mouth, he spoke in a cold tone. "So many guests have come. Don't you explain?" After speaking, his eyes flashed like flowing light, looking at Jian Wushuang. "Great divine spirits, these..." Before he could finish, he felt a burning sensation erupting from his heart. His divine body was being consumed. The methods of the 3 major divine spirits far exceeded his imagination. It was not like Qi Zhouxiao's simple crushing with divine power, but a special method that tortured him. Seeing Jian Wushuang's painful expression, Danbao was about to step forward but was stopped by the great monk. The pain of a cultivator was nothing compared to the tearing of the divine body. Jian Wushuang gritted his teeth and shook his head at Danbao. Now was not the time to act recklessly. They still relied on Danbao to turn the tables later. Otherwise, they would have no chance. The strength of the 3 major divine spirits touched upon the realm of the 9th tribulation, and with the immortal divine temple, they could easily crush them. Danbao closed his eyes slightly and endured it. For him to become a god, how many people had perished? At that moment, he didn't know if his divine being had fulfilled its duty. Wherever he went, there would be fighting, there would be death. Was this really the true meaning of life? In the instant Danbao closed his eyes, the level of life underwent a qualitative change. The green aura on his body erupted instantly. Even the immortal divine temple trembled along with it. Jiang Wuya glanced at Danbao, feeling surprise deep down, then nodded towards the rear. It was time to take action, but for safety's sake, it was best to let Danbao willingly hand over the treasure. Torturing Jian Wushuang alone wasn't enough. Jiang Wuya noticed another person among the crowd who was related to Danbao. Raising his finger, Jiang Wuya unleashed a burst of light. Wherever the light reached, it shattered the void, aiming straight at Elder Blue's face. Unable to bear it any longer, Danbao stepped forward, shouting loudly, What do you want? Just say it. It has nothing to do with them. Originally, the plan was to have him cooperate and enter the immortal divine temple. But it seemed they had overestimated the patience of the three major divine spirits. Now they were immediately pressuring Danbao to produce the life treasure. Blue was aware of this, so facing the light, he roared angrily, transforming into the shadow of a dragon god, struggling to resist, while shouting to Danbao, "Don't give up. Remember what the great elder said. For the survival of the Borun clan, also known as the Palunga clan." A familiar voice sounded, and Danbao turned to look at Blue. Behind Blue, he saw the figure of the great elder, encouraging him. After the destruction of the Palunga clan and the fall of the great elder, my heart was already dead, and life has given me everything, Danbao murmured, lowering his head. The three major divine spirits, however, misunderstood and thought Danbao couldn't hold on any longer. They then cast a forbidden spell at the Elder Blue and Divine Wood King, suppressing everyone in this spacetime. Jiang Wuya behaved as if nothing had happened, calmly saying, "Danbao, the treasure inside you originally belonged to the immortal divine temple. I hope you reconsider and don't do anything useless." Implicitly, he didn't want Danbao to resist and wanted him to hand over the treasure. They had already shown excessive greed upon seeing the green light leaking from Danbao's body. But it was all sugar-coated words. "Heh!" Danbao chuckled coldly, suddenly lifting his head, continuing, "You all don't understand the true meaning of life. This treasure means nothing to you." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned his hand into claws and plunged it into his own chest. Green blood flowed from his chest, traces of blood appearing at the corners of his mouth. His voice was hoarse. "If you want it, take it." With determination, Danbao dug out the green sphere from his chest. This was not a phantom of the life treasure but the real life treasure. The moment he took out the treasure, the green light on the staff in his hand dimmed. Behind him, countless people fell into silence. "No need for this." Jian Wushuang gritted his teeth, shaking his head. For him or for them, the treasure meant everything. People could die, but treasures could never be handed over willingly. It was no different from death. Divine Wood King and Lord Hangmu were also surprised at Danbao. Perhaps this was the gap. Danbao, however, didn't care. He directly threw the treasure out, tossing it to Jiang Wuya, as if treating the coveted life treasure, which countless people envied, as a clump of soil. The three divine spirits saw the treasure flying towards them, their eyes instantly becoming fiery. Jiang Wuya reached out and caught the treasure. Finding nothing unusual, he was overjoyed. He didn't expect Danbao to be so straightforward. It would have been better if he had been like this earlier. "Now, can you let us go?" Danbao covered his chest, his voice weak. The three divine spirits, excited after obtaining the treasure, no longer bothered to look at the crowd, casually waving their hands to lift the spatial restrictions around them. The immortal divine temple stabilized. Just now, they had used the domain around the immortal divine temple to suppress everyone. Otherwise, it would have been somewhat difficult for the three divine spirits to deal with them without using force. They were not like Babidi, they wouldn't procrastinate. They directly suppressed and demanded the treasure. Effortlessly, poor Babidi was still trailing behind. With a splash, the prohibition was lifted. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief, but deep down there was a sense of unwillingness. Even though Danbao had saved their lives this time by using his treasure, they felt no gratitude. This was the reality of the strong. If Danbao didn't become a god, they couldn't embark on the path to resurrection. Everything was over. There was no hope in sight. If only from the beginning, if there hadn't been a path to resurrection from the start, if this had just been a simple gathering, how much better it would have been. If that were the case, even facing the withering of life and approaching the end would have been better than now. The most painful thing is like this. The person who gave you hope destroyed it with their own hands. Especially Lord Hangmu and Divine Wood King. That treasure, it was something they both pooled together. Consider them the first investors in Danbao. They even heavily invested. But now Danbao has simply handed over the treasure to someone else. How could they be resigned to this? You, Divine Wood King pointed at Danbao, not knowing how to express himself, finally just sighing. But Lord Hungmu wasn't as easy to talk to. He grabbed Danbao by the collar, loudly questioning, "Have you gone mad? That was the opportunity to ascend to godhood. Why did you just give it away?" Seeing Lord Hungmu take action, Elder Blue rushed forward. Both he and Danbao are part of the Palunga tribe. The last wish of the Elder was for him to protect Danbao and leave the infinite world, to survive in the outside world. So when Danbao gave away the treasure, he didn't react. Becoming a god or not becoming one, it doesn't matter. Being alive offers greater hope. Seeing Blue rushing to confront Lord Hungmu, Danbao shook his head. Jian Wushuang, standing aside, didn't show much change, just casually glancing at the great monk. This great monk, known as Danbao's Dao Guardian, was standing there dumbly at the moment, silent, like a beast about to go mad, emitting a tremendous aura. The rest were still complaining about Danbao giving away the treasure. Only Jian Wushuang noticed the great monk's anomaly. But now, facing the immortal divine temple, they were already in a bind. They couldn't question it at this time. Now that the life treasure was gone, godhood was hopeless. Everyone was deflated, standing there at a loss. Lian Xing seemed the most relaxed, as if he saw through everything, looking up at the sky above the universe sea, saying casually, "It was just a dream. Haha, a dream. Was it really just a dream?" Jian Wushuang asked himself inwardly. If it was a dream, then he had suffered a great loss. Originally, he didn't have much attachment to the internal affairs of Wanlu, and Weiss only asked him to enter Wanlu to find treasures, not to help Danbao become the god of life. As for the treasures promised by Realm King, he wasn't very interested. Anyway, he had made enough profit this time. Becoming the universe master, no matter what, he would have the power of life when he went out, and he would be able to protect himself. Completing the last wish of the Palunga tribe's elder was also not a problem. Wu Li was the same. He was also the universe master of the Sixth Tribulation Realm, and before coming here, he couldn't have imagined becoming the universe master of the Sixth Tribulation Realm. The only two universe masters were surprisingly the most relaxed. Parting ways, they were now facing a breakup. Feeling the aura of Babidi behind them, there was no surprise. If they came, so be it. It didn't matter to them anyway. Some people even thought about joining Babidi now. Once human desires were unleashed, they were hard to conceal. Danbao lost hope, but there was still hope in Babidi. Most importantly, Babidi still had Qi Juxiao. They could fight against the immortal divine temple. Joining Babidi was also a way out. They just worried that Babidi wouldn't accept them. With Qi Juxiao's top-notch combat power, there was no need to recruit them, the Seventh Tribulation cultivators. Pitiful. Seeing the loss of color in those people, Jian Wushuang also felt pity for them. But it didn't concern him. Danbao, let's prepare to leave here. He walked towards Danbao and Blue. Lord Hungmu had already let go of Danbao and stood alone on the side, looking desolate. No destination. After comforting Danbao, Blue looked up at Jian Wushuang and asked, "Where are we going?" "Leaving here," Jian Wushuang said decisively. He had just asked about the treasures that Weiss needed, but Weiss hadn't answered. It was better to leave the universe sea first and then figure things out. If not, he could just go to Zhenwuyang for refuge. Cultivating in the Wanlu universe for a while wouldn't be a bad thing. They could also search for the treasures Weiss needed. Danbao kept his head down, but didn't answer, his brows furrowed. His consciousness wasn't here. Jian Wushuang's eyes flickered, also noticing something unusual. He wanted to say something but didn't. Instead, a strand of his consciousness flew towards the immortal divine temple. After the three divine spirits obtained the life treasure, they directly entered the central altar of the temple. By now, they had placed the life treasures into the groove above the altar. The round treasures of life fit perfectly into the groove without any gaps. The moment they entered the groove, an infinitely powerful force of life erupted above the altar. This power shook the entire immortal divine temple. Jian Wushuang's consciousness was just approaching the immortal divine temple when it was shattered by the shock. Dan Bao. He seemed to understand something, looking shocked at Dan Bao, the life treasure. After being refined by Dan Bao, it had long merged into one. Realm King's command had already been recognized. How could it be snatched away like this? It was always because they were too cautious, or rather, because they had protected Dan Bao too well. Can you still control that treasure? Jian Wushuang didn't dare to ask directly. Instead, he transmitted his voice to Dan Bao. If it were true, Dan Bao wouldn't just lose the life treasure, he might even gain control of the immortal divine temple for free. Boom! A muffled roar erupted inside the immortal divine temple. This time, without waiting for Dan Bao's answer, Jian Wushuang confirmed his guess. Hearing the commotion, everyone looked towards the temple. Just like Jian Wushuang, they understood Dan Bao's intentions. Even a fool could see it now, because above the immortal divine temple, a green light and shadow appeared. The light and shadow had a human face, exactly like Dan Bao's. With a staff of life in hand, it was surrounded by green light. It even enveloped the temple. With a wave of his hand, he suppressed the temple. Or rather, he controlled the temple himself. The three divine spirits were completely dumbfounded. They had originally thought that obtaining the life treasure would elevate the immortal divine temple to a higher level. But they hadn't expected to be making wedding clothes for others. For a moment, the faces of the three divine spirits were like pig livers. They were fuming. You dare to trick me? How dare you? Squeak. The three divine spirits were about to erupt in anger, but found they couldn't even speak properly, their voices squeaking like mice. Dan Bao's Tao image was now seated above the altar. It was called an altar, but now it looked more like a temple. It was dedicated to the god of life. Here, it never belonged to you. Dan Bao's voice was cold and stern, his gaze piercing. Countless bubbles surged, relocating the three great divine spirits, the 10 divine generals, and hundreds of slumbering 8th Tribulation Realm envoys onto the white slabs of the immortal divine temple, appearing before Jian Wushuang and the others. At this moment, Dan Bao's true form began to shatter. His essence transformed into the god within the temple. This immense metamorphosis. Within the immortal divine temple, Dan Bao was a true god, invincible. The three great divine spirits were like toys easily suppressed. Jian Wushuang watched in astonishment. This ability to speak and create rules made him exceedingly wary. The three great divine spirits, once considered supremely powerful, were mere toys in Dan Bao's hands. Their lives manipulated, all disregarded. Phew! The Grand Monk's eyes sparkled at this moment, more excited than anyone else. He raised his arm and exclaimed loudly, "Let's go! Into the temple!" He was the first to enter the temple, kneeling down and proclaiming, "Congratulations, young master. One step further, and you will obtain the true god's form." Witnessing this scene, many sighed inwardly, simultaneously regretting their slow reactions. Even Lord Hengmu, who had just been complaining about Dan Bao, swiftly followed into the temple and prostrated himself. The divine manifestation, incredibly majestic. Outside the temple, they felt only amazement. But upon entering the temple and beholding Dan Bao's god form, they found it unbelievable. With endless power, this was what they envisioned as divine. Gods, they should be like this. Jian Wushuang and Elder Blue also entered the temple nonchalantly, experiencing tremendous awe upon entering. However, they did not kneel. There was a difference in status. If he knelt, wouldn't it be a joke? Inside the temple, Jian Wushuang simply stood aside casually, waiting for Dan Bao to deal with the strong of the immortal divine temple. In his view, Dan Bao was the god of life and should not make things difficult for these people. Most likely, he would let them go. But next, Dan Bao's expression changed drastically, roaring angrily, "Occupying the temple, seizing my treasures, you are not worthy of life." As soon as his words fell, those slumbering 8th Tribulation powerhouses, who had little vitality left, began to dissipate under Danbao's command. The 10 divine generals were the same. Even the universe master began to perish. Life faded away. However, Jian Wushuang noticed something strange. The divine bodies of these universe masters did not shatter, and even their universe Tao arenas remained intact. They just lost their vitality, lost their lives. The 3 great divine spirits remained at the end, unable to speak, their eyes filled with despair, frantically shaking their heads, but unable to stop, until life vanished. In an instant, hundreds of 8th Tribulation Realm beings were slain. This shook everyone, especially Lord Hengmu, who knelt on the ground trembling uncontrollably, occasionally glancing at Jian Wushuang and Elder Blue. He wanted them to intercede. He feared retribution from Danbao. Thinking of grabbing Danbao by the collar just now, Lord Hengmu wished he could slap himself twice. He couldn't fathom how he had the audacity to question Danbao just now. Now regret overwhelmed him. However, Jian Wushuang paid no attention to Lord Hengmu's gaze, because he didn't think Danbao would trouble Lord Hengmu over such matters. Moreover, from the conversation between Realm King and Weiss earlier, he knew that the role of gods was to create rules, not merely to kill. Otherwise, what would they need Realm King for? With him around, any threat could be dealt with. Did they still need to struggle here? After tidying up the many powerhouses of the Immortal Divine Temple, Danbao's Tao image condensed and gathered above the altar, becoming a divine appearance. The original body shattered, transforming into the appearance of a god. He emerged from it again. But what emerged was an incarnation, ethereal and elusive, like a phantom. Yet no one dared to underestimate Danbao now. He was even more formidable than before. Danbao's ethereal form held the scepter of life, guiding all living beings. The power of life also erupted in the Immortal Divine Temple. For a moment, everyone felt the immense vitality from within. Those who had perished in tribulations were now just a step away from resurrection, lacking only an origin source. That is, the moment Danbao truly became a god, they could embark on the path of true resurrection. The eruption of life force not only benefited everyone present, but also triggered the revival of those fallen temple powerhouses. Originally stripped of vitality by Danbao, they now reignited. The revived temple powerhouses underwent earth-shaking changes, like metallic life forms, except in different colors. After revival, they were clad in green battle armor. On their chests was a symbol, God. Their eyes turned green. Vitality filled their bodies, instantly restoring them to their peak. Their combat power also reached its peak. We pay homage to our Lord. The revived temple powerhouses knelt one after another. Their vitality and consciousness had changed. Danbao stood before them, his expression majestic. Arise, Russell. The original 3 divine spirits, along with the 10 divine generals, and even the 99 8th Tribulation Realm powerhouses all stood up. The symbols on their chests also underwent some changes. Commander, General, Soldier. This kind of symbol made Jian Wushuang's expression flicker. Immediately, he thought of the symbols on the pieces of the SkySight heavenly chessboard. Considering Danbao's current identity, a buzzing sound resonated in his mind. The SkySight heavenly chessboard. It was far more intricate than he had initially thought. This treasure, it had connections to the divine. Simultaneously, he recalled Teacher Xianyi's identity. The one who could give him such a treasure, Teacher Xianyi, might also be a god. The Immortal Divine Temple. The word immortal represented eternal life. So what did this Skywatch chessboard represent? However he looked at it, the Skywatch chessboard didn't seem suitable for him. Moreover, the strength of the pieces within the chessboard couldn't compare to that of the Immortal Divine Temple. The origin of the pieces in the Skywatch chessboard with the Commander title, although also at the 8th Tribulation Realm, were much weaker. The Commander, General, and Soldier manipulated by Danbao's Immortal Divine Temple were all at the peak of the 8th Tribulation Realm. With complete vitality restored, those revived pieces possessed the top combat power of the 8th Tribulation Realm. The temple messengers with the general title even had the pinnacle combat power of the 8th Tribulation Realm. The three major divine spirits had the limit of 8th tribulation realm strength. However, they lacked the god title. In his sky-sight heavenly chessboard, there were pieces with the god title. But the profundity of the sky-sight heavenly chessboard couldn't match that of the immortal divine temple. This left him somewhat puzzled. Clearly, he had glimpsed something, but he couldn't figure it out. Teacher Xianxia. Jian Wushuang took a deep breath, thinking to himself, "What exactly are you planning? Master, what role does this chessboard play?" Even after reaching the level of Universe Master, he could only use the pieces above, unable to truly mobilize the internal origin source. The immortal divine temple represented life. Based on this deduction, then the chessboard represented the heavenly Tao. But he didn't cultivate the heavenly Tao. The heavenly Tao was unique. In fact, it was a kind of all things. It's just that his all things transformed into life. It had only a slight relationship with the heavenly Tao. The heavenly Tao contained more, such as heavenly mechanisms, Zen, destiny, etc., all of which were different from his sword Tao. Everything in the world, he had always pursued the supremacy of the sword Tao. Even if he mastered everything, it was to assist the sword Tao. The function of this chessboard for him was to comprehend tribulations and to assimilate and comprehend. Now, he had also grasped a method suggested to him, which was to create life, using the internal origin source pieces to deduce his own Tao. In the future, he would have to ask Danbao about the operation of the immortal divine temple. Perhaps he could emulate it, learn something. Right now, holding the sky-sight heavenly chessboard, he was wasting it as a fire stick. Looking at Danbao's amnesty of the world, he also yearned for it. Now, the strong men of the temple had all been brought under Danbao's seat. For a moment, talent abounded. Instead, people like them seemed burdensome. Jian Wushuang also intentionally or unintentionally looked towards the great monk. Finding that the other party didn't have the sense of crisis, but was rather pleased after Danbao achieved this position. A Tao guardian? Indeed, it was like this. The stronger the young master, the happier they were. However, Jian Wushuang saw a hint of greed in the other party's eyes. The immortal divine temple originally belonged to Danbao. It also came with so-called divine envoys, disciples. The role of Tao guardian seemed redundant. Moreover, when Realm King didn't mention much about Tao guardians, he became wary of the great monk and started to guard against him. Higher heavens. That was where his inner demons originated. The great monk was definitely not as simple as he appeared on the surface. He must be on guard. Having suffered too much, Jian Wushuang didn't want to derail again. Moreover, the development of the overall situation had always been disproportionate to his strength, making him feel powerless. In the infinite great world, it was okay, he was a key force in several battles. Whether it was in the Roman River or in the Dragon God continent, he had shown his strength. But after entering the Wanlu divine realm, his role became smaller and smaller. He was said to be adventuring. He was more like a passerby, a witness. Danbao looked down at everyone, holding the scepter, and walked slowly, standing at the edge of the temple, backed by everyone, his voice indifferent. "Get up, everyone. We still have to deal with the metallic lifeforms and Babidi. My true body and my avatar cannot leave the temple. We will need your help then." Transforming into the embodiment of the god of life, Danbao's demeanor grew increasingly indifferent, developing a new understanding towards life. It was a departure from his previous character. As they watched Danbao's figure recede, they sensed a profound loneliness emanating from him. It was a loneliness born from tempering, a loneliness that came after reaching the peak. Even Blue felt a sense of unfamiliarity when he looked at Danbao. Wuli felt the same way. He used to often pat Danbao's head, but now just seeing his back made him nervous, let alone reaching out to pat him. This was transformation. Jian Wushuang had long grown accustomed to such occurrences. After all, he had all traversed through various stages. Just like Jian Wushuang now, looking back at those former companions. Like Zhen Wuyang, the former emperor. In the past, encountering him would evoke a sense of oppression and self-respect. Now, Jian Wushuang could casually call out his name without any sense of oppression, because both had reached the same level. Jian Wushuang was even stronger. Even if he addressed Jin Wuyang with respect, the latter would feel somewhat unworthy. Jian Wushuang's normal state was peak power at the 7th Tribulation Realm. In his peak state, he could reach the pinnacle of the 8th Tribulation Realm. A universe master at the 5th Tribulation Realm would be almost petrified upon seeing him, let alone being addressed. Perhaps some would see this as disrespectful, but it was actually the greatest form of respect. It was the momentum that increased with strength. He had long grown accustomed to it. As for facing the Realm King or Whis, Jian Wushuang felt no palpitations. It was because of fearless ignorance. Unable to even detect their breath, he remained indifferent. They could converse casually. Strong beings like Weiss or gods, who truly exuded pressure, would probably leave him speechless. After all, they were beings who could even alter the highest law rules. This surpassed Jian Wushuang's imagination. It was a power beyond the Tribulation Realm. According to Realm King, the appearance of the God of Life would give birth to true 9th Tribulation Realm beings and produce superpowerful individuals who could transcend the Tribulation Realm. This indicated that the 9th Tribulation Realm was a bottleneck, a position where one could stand shoulder to shoulder with gods. Hence, it was so difficult to reach. Of the 9 great spacetimes, only 3 eternal beings existed. These 3 beings were all related to the Realm King. It was highly probable that they were stuck at the 9th Tribulation Realm. Or perhaps the law rules of the northern spacetime were insufficient to support them. Hence, they remained so mysterious, rarely ever making a move and keeping a low profile. The top-tier strong individuals were still those universe masters of the 8th Tribulation Realm. Once the God of Life appeared and broke this law rule, perhaps there would be many eternal beings in the future northern spacetime. Now they were dealing with matters of the future. At this moment, Jian Wushuang regained some sense of presence. From being weak to now, it had been a gradual progression. They followed the paths of those who came before in cultivation. Until now, they found themselves in the miraculous position of contributing to the creation of cultivation paths. Watching Danbao's figure recede, he couldn't help but feel admiration from the depths of his heart. Now, facing Babidi or the metallic life form, they had absolute confidence. The immortal divine temple stood tall above the universe sea. This was their most relaxed moment, even more so than when they were hiding under Danbao's shield of life in the past. Because with those envoys of life, they didn't need to worry at all. Qi Zhouxiao had arrived, but they had the capability to hold him off. Jian Wushuang took a step forward and, following Danbao's lead, stood at the edge of the temple, gazing at the approaching aura. A vast aura swept across the universe sea. It was Babidi's cosmic ship. A colossal entity, flickering with shadows, approached from a distance. In the blink of an eye, it flickered countless times. The aura clearly arrived before them, yet the ship itself hadn't been seen. It took a moment longer for it to truly arrive. The speed was such that the power of matter had yet to catch up, but the aura had already arrived. The cosmic ship hummed as it descended. Babidi couldn't wait to leap down with Qi Zhouxiao. At the moment of their arrival, a triangular phantom appeared in the distant sky, breaking through space and descending as well. It was the metallic life form. They're all here. Jian Wushuang's brow furrowed. If they were besieging one side, they still had the strength, but fighting the metallic life form and Qi Zhouxiao alone would be somewhat difficult. Danbao, upon seeing this, smirked slightly, somewhat pleased with the situation. It was simpler for everyone to come together rather than seeking them out individually. This time, he would eradicate these scum in one fell swoop. The rubbish contained within life. Humph. Trash from the southern spacetime. Babidi also detected the aura of the metallic life form and spat disdainfully, showing no respect. The silver pyramid hovered in the void, observing the situation like a spectator. The metallic life form was also a form of life. Moreover, it was a superpower from the southern spacetime. It wouldn't be foolish. It understood the intentions of these people from the enslaved metallic puppets. It knew that Danbao and the others aimed to destroy it, but it also understood that Babidi and the others aimed to kill Danbao. The gathering of the three parties wasn't a closed loop. The metallic life form aimed to transform the entire Wanlu divine tree, seize the ocean of divine power here, and nurture countless metallic warriors. So it wasn't in a hurry. Babidi was the one in a rush. Danbao also had absolute confidence. Only Babidi was anxious. The Silver Pyramid, the Immortal Divine Temple, and the Cosmic Ship. The three flying treasures floated in the air. In terms of hierarchy, the Immortal Divine Temple and the Silver Pyramid of the metallic lifeform were slightly stronger. But in terms of individual combat power, Qi Juxiao was the strongest. The metallic lifeform couldn't leave the pyramid, and its contained divine power could only be used for attacks through the pyramid. It was not enough to threaten Qi Juxiao. In fact, facing Qi Juxiao alone was extremely dangerous. Its metallic puppets were also insufficient. At most, they possessed peak 8th Tribulation realm strength, not enough for Qi Juxiao to slaughter alone. But all of this was Qi Juxiao himself. Babidi had no combat power at all. At best, he could match an average 3rd Tribulation Universe master, although his methods were somewhat special. His combat power was like air among the others. Once there was an opportunity to eliminate Babidi first, it would mean the end of the threat. Qi Juxiao was just a top-tier fighter. Intelligence was equal to 0. The metallic life form quickly planned to catch Babidi off guard. It was much simpler than confronting Qi Juxiao head-on. Babidi's side was unaware that they had been targeted. He stood with his hands on his hips, sneering at the people on the Immortal Divine Temple. This time, there won't be any more accidents. Then he turned his head and said to someone behind him, Hun Tian, it's up to you. Yes. Hun Tian held several small flags and directly scattered them into the surrounding spacetime. The flags fell into the Universe Sea. In just a moment, the waves of the Universe Sea began to solidify, turning into ice. Space was also condensed. Time was cut off. The communication with the heavens was severed. The grand formation descended. This time, there was truly no way to escape. Babidi blocked off all paths, including his own. There couldn't be any more accidents. The metallic life forms in the Silver Pyramid were also stunned to see Babidi's determination. Is he really going all out? He came from the southern spacetime. To others, he was the greatest threat in Wanlu, a terrifying existence. But in the southern spacetime, he was like a stray dog, driven out by others. Sneaking into Wanlu Divine Tree, it was to become stronger, then to cleanse the shame with blood. Return to the southern spacetime. Now seeing Babidi so determined, there was suddenly a stirring. It seemed they were all extremely arrogant, extremely wanton. But they were all fighting. They all had their own untold secrets. Babidi was the same. Though he came from the starry sky, his background was extremely bleak. He was Mieshang's pet, enslaved by others, especially by Mieshang. That kind of torment had long driven him insane. If he couldn't become a god, he would become a demon. He must stand at the pinnacle and wash away past shame. Kill! Endless rage filled Babidi's eyes. With a point of his finger, the Qi Juxiao transformed into thousands of feet, stepping forward. Danbao retreated to the core of the temple, raising his hand to shake the entire Immortal Divine Temple, shouting angrily, Destroy! All the messengers on the Immortal Divine Temple moved into action. More than 100 of them. Divine Wood King and the Great Monk also acted at this moment. Together, they besieged Qi Juxiao. As for Jian Wushuang and the others, they could only watch helplessly. The battle began in an instant. Scarlet Juxiao fought alone against 108th Tribulation Realm experts. Among them were the 4 strongest. Jiang Wuya's trio and Divine Wood King. The massive Moyun Vine descended, surrounding Qi Juxiao. The clouds moved in all directions. The battle pierced through the space-time of the Universe Sea, creating countless black holes. Each one was an entrance. Everyone held their breath. This battle was incredibly intense. It surpassed the scale of ancient moon spacetime from ancient times to the present. A battle of 108th Tribulation experts. Forget about ancient moon spacetime, such a scene was rarely seen in the entire northern spacetime. Only when some unique secrets appeared would it gather hundreds of Eighth Tribulation experts. But these experts were also from all over, not from one spacetime river. Unlike the situation they were in now, 100 top Eighth Tribulation experts. Among them were extreme Eighth Tribulation experts. Qi Juxiao's divine power was comparable to the power of a Ninth Tribulation. It directly erupted to 20 million. With just a casual strike, he could heavily injure the peak Eighth Tribulation experts. The 99 top 8 Tribulation realm experts of the Immortal Divine Temple, combined with the Grand Formation, transformed into gods and demons, their strength reaching the level of a half-step Ninth Tribulation realm. The three major divine spirits unleashed their pinnacle secrets. 3 Qi become one. Led by Zhang Wuya, they also transformed into half-step Ninth Tribulation realm. The 10 great divine generals, led by Chaoga, began to merge as well. Their merging technique involved a strange treasure. Jian Wushuang and others had never seen anything like it before. Commander, General, Soldier. The commander was Jiang Taishu, after the fusion of the 3 Qi. The general was Luoyang, after Chaoga's fusion. The soldier was Nan Tian after Southern Saint King took the lead in merging. The 3 divine bodies each erupted with the aura of half-step Ninth Tribulation realm. From adversity they turned the tide. For the first time they began to suppress Qi Juxiao. Elder Blue and Divine Wood King were momentarily confused, unable to keep up with the pace and had to assist from the sidelines. The people of the Immortal Divine Temple were envious and excited, saying, "This time we've won for sure. No wonder Danbao is so calm. Turns out they had a plan long ago." "It's not that simple." Jian Wushuang's lips curled upwards. He was equally sensitive to the power of life and discovered a faint green light around the Immortal Divine Temple. That was the domain of the Immortal Divine Temple. Within this domain, as long as Qi Juxiao couldn't kill Jiang Taishu and the others in one fell swoop, they wouldn't perish. They would be restored immediately by Danbao after being injured. It was practically invincibility. The combat power of the half-step Ninth Tribulation realm. These 3 ultimate messengers of life were almost unbeatable. They could even wear Qi Juxiao down to death. Unless it was a true Ninth Tribulation realm powerhouse, they could break through. But now, the strongest individual was Qi Juxiao, only comparable to the Ninth Tribulation realm. They were really going to win this time. Everything is about to end. Jian Wushuang couldn't hide his joy. The others felt the same way. After fighting for so long, they finally saw hope. Danbao kept growing, getting stronger. Defeating Qi Juxiao, leaving only one, Babidi, was like dealing with air. There was no threat. Finally, it was the metallic life forms. With the Immortal Divine Temple, they could suppress the opponent. Everything was moving in a positive direction. At this moment, Babidi was somewhat panicked. Qi Juxiao's current potential had been maximized. There was no hope of further advancement. If they couldn't win now, really no cards left to play. How did it come to this? Babidi frowned, disbelief in his eyes. His panic did not escape the notice of Hun Tian behind him. Even Babidi was panicking. Now it was truly a matter of life and death. Inside the Silver Pyramid, the internal structure was extremely complex. Countless tiny particles were operating in an orderly manner. Looking around, countless metal particles were manipulating the entire pyramid. At the core of the pyramid, there was a semi-figure, entirely black, smooth on the surface, with arms, chest, and a head. It just didn't have clear facial features like a normal person. This black figure only had a scorching eye on its face. Below the figure, endless divine power seawater gathered. Countless metal particles were using divine power seawater to create this black puppet. And the consciousness of the metallic life from existed in the eyes of the black puppet. In the scorching eye sockets, a tiny puppet walked out. Such a powerful life, controlled by a waste. What a pity! The tiny puppet was the metallic life form from the South spacetime. There was also a light brain in his head, which was his true consciousness. Even the tiny puppet was a manifestation created by him. His strength was actually quite weak, somewhat similar to Babidi, but he could create extremely powerful puppets. Life, divine power. With these two things, he was invincible. He nurtured countless metal warriors and powerful metal puppets. This was his specialty. The black metal puppet at the moment was his masterpiece. It was only halfway completed now, and it was just a shell. Unless the entire divine power C was used as the divine body, and the source of life from Wanlu was used as the origin source, it would reach its peak. At that time, he would have the true power of the ninth tribulation realm, and he would personally control it, regaining the greatest capital of the South spacetime. But now he couldn't see any hope. Qi Jiuxiao was bound to fall sooner or later. Then it would be his turn. His fighting force was inferior to that of Qi Jiuxiao under his command. Although capable of self-preservation, there was still a risk of being suppressed. Once suppressed, Dan Bao would be able to comfortably ascend the stairway to godhood. By then, he would become the god of life in the northern spacetime, monopolizing the entire Wanlu divine tree. A kick could send him flying, casually thrown into some temporal rifts. He would truly become a dog of a bereaved family. No, I cannot lose. There was a tone of determination in his voice. Then he turned and entered the blazing eye socket. Command had been issued. The plan originally prepared to deal with Babidi was now redirected towards the Immortal Divine Temple. He felt that the Immortal Divine Temple was similar to Babidi. Both were strong externally but weak internally. Taking advantage of the current peak strength, all engaged in combating Qi Jiuxiao. He could completely arrange his subordinates to sneak attack the Immortal Divine Temple. However, the Immortal Divine Temple was different from the cosmic ship. The defense of the cosmic ship was very fragile. The defense of the Immortal Divine Temple was relatively strong. It required more fighting force. Merely enslaving the top 10 puppets was far from enough. He still needed endless metal warriors. Metal warriors even more perfect than those metal crawlers. Powerful divine power. But that was only one aspect. The divine power of metal crawlers was very strong, but they had no defense at all. Even if they bred more, they couldn't enter the Immortal Divine Temple. So he needed to breed stronger life forms, otherwise going there would be in vain. Metal armored warrior? Yes, it's you. The metal light brain kept flashing, and soon a perfect metal armored warrior was created. The divine power was fixed at 15 million. Defense capabilities rivaled the top treasures of the 7th Tribulation Realm. Even top experts of the 8th Tribulation Realm would need several moves to break through. The total divine power contained within was enough to battle a peak expert of the 8th Tribulation Realm for several breaths. Extremely perfect, just within his defense capabilities. Not a single bit of divine power was wasted. After the first metal armored warrior was bred, the second one was automatically generated. Then came production in multiples. Soon 3,000 were born. Almost there, the metal light brain transmitted a thought, summoning the control of the top 10 metal puppets and instructing, attack the Immortal Divine Temple. Only success is allowed. If necessary, self-destruct. Snap. The miniature light brain felt it was not perfect enough, so it took out several divine power crystals from the blazing eye sockets. These are the divine power ignition crystals. When you self-destruct, all 10 of you must activate them. Try to detonate near that Dan Bao. The top 10 metal puppets nodded together. No words were wasted. Orders were given and they immediately set off. In one breath, this was puppets, calculating perfection at all times. Unlike cultivators who had various variables, the Silver Pyramid was still a considerable distance from the Immortal Divine Temple to ensure the perfect coefficient of the plan. The metal lifeform first used the pyramid to quickly approach the Immortal Divine Temple. Then a dark hole appeared beneath the pyramid. Instantly, the top 10 metal puppets, accompanied by 3,000 metal armored warriors, appeared around the Immortal Divine Temple. Charge! Hum! All metal warriors erupted, rushing towards the Immortal Divine Temple recklessly. Jian Wushuang just reacted and quickly retreated. Not out of fear, but out of concern that when Dan Bao acted later, he might accidentally injure himself. The sneak attack by the metal life was long anticipated by them. Dan Bao was invincible in the Immortal Divine Temple. so they weren't worried at all. Some even just stared blankly like that. The golden-armored warriors, as they approached the immortal divine temple, found themselves suspended in midair by Danbao's divine scepter. Their vitality was instantly drained away, just like it happened to the three major divine spirits before. Although their vitality vanished, their divine power remained intact. With a gentle tap of the scepter in Danbao's hand, these golden-armored warriors regained their life force once again. However, this time they gained a different power, different from the metallic intellect they were injected with. Their consciousness also shifted completely, now wholly obedient to Danbao. Could be said that within the span of a breath, these metallic lives were subverted, a strategy akin to using one's strength against themselves. The controlled golden-armored warriors, along with the silver puppets, swiftly turned around and charged towards Qi Zhouxiao, rather than directly attacking the pyramid. Danbao understood the pyramid's uniqueness. Its defensive capabilities were beyond what they could easily overcome. Attacking it would only be a futile effort. So, it was better to besiege Qi Zhouxiao first. Qi Zhouxiao, who was already finding it somewhat challenging to deal with the life envoys at the half-step ninth tribulation realm, was now surrounded by thousands of golden-armored warriors, causing his divine body to sustain some damage. His divine power also kept diminishing. Now is the time. Strike with all your might. Jiang Taishu's three energies merged into one, and a faint force of nothingness enveloped his body, enhancing his divine power to its peak. He raised his hand, shaking the heavens, and shouted, "Now is the time!" Countless feathered sword blades transformed into a sea of swords, overwhelming Qi Zhouxiao. This force was enough to annihilate those at the half-step ninth tribulation realm, making it extremely difficult even for Qi Zhouxiao to withstand. Forced to resist head-on, he could only see his divine power dwindling. He had no replenishment of life force. He had to bear the injuries on his own. Watching from the rear, Babidi felt anxious but powerless. How could things come to such a pass? Qi Zhouxiao is invincible. Babidi clenched his fists, his eyes filled with frustration. If he couldn't succeed, then they would perish together. His resolve was evident. However, he failed to notice the killer intent directed not at the immortal divine temple but at himself. That killing intent leaked from the eyes. It was from Hun Tian of the Yongheng clan. Though enslaved, he still retained a sense of Yongheng consciousness, struggling in his mind. He was waiting for this opportunity. Qi Zhouxiao was currently unable to spare any attention, constantly drained. If he were to strike at Babidi now, hardly anyone could stop him. Dylan was just at the pinnacle of the 7th tribulation realm, while he possessed the strength of the 8th tribulation realm. He could easily kill him. What he waited for now was to break free from Babidi's control, ambush and kill him, then defect to the immortal divine temple. This was his trump card. If Babidi won, there would be no need for it. But now that Babidi's ship was sinking, he didn't want to go down with him. Joining the immortal divine temple would also require some sincerity. Like killing Babidi. As long as Babidi died, Qi Zhouxiao would be up for grabs. Just a madman. No longer a threat to the immortal divine temple. Though not a significant achievement, it was still better than nothing. The Yongheng clan shall never be enslaved. A flame of determination blazed in Hun Tian's eyes, like an ancient demon breaking free from its cage. In that moment of liberation, he swiftly gathered energy in his hands, condensing a rainbow-colored beam. The light burst forth,